So I'm going to try something unusual tonight. If you want to add Outlight Clicker to your phone, you can. If not, take out a piece of paper and we'll do it as a manual survey. We'll see. But I want to talk an issue that's a little bit new, that's been in the news, and it's this whole aspect of going viral and firms, things hitting the news unexpectedly, a lot of headline risk. I feel like it's a lot different than when I was where you are. And you never know what's going to become a major issue. Nike took a chance with the Kaepernick. It probably actually benefited them, but they decided to try something. I remember on Facebook, a bunch of guys my age who haven't bought tennis shoes since their sophomore year of high school. They're saying, "I'm never going to buy Nike again." And it's like, yeah, I'm sure that's going to take them under. You're seeing what Disney's going on with Florida, which is a pretty touchy issue. And who knows, you assume, everybody assumes that, we got it right. I got all this figured out. You don't never know what's going to be the next issue. I'm kind of imagining 30 years from now, some elementary school is going to be named after Barack Obama, and they're going to be a big protest because someone found a video of him eating a hamburger. And like, how could you eat meat? You evil person, and it's just like, times change. So I'm kind of curious just to see how much times have changed. So I want to try a special issue. So I can get really real in a lot of danger. I can get, this could be like my last class ever teach. But trying to find an issue that's kind of that issue of really the issue I think is a generation was raised in a certain way, and now they're going through this new world and they don't realize the world has changed. And they do stupid things. So a good example, which I won't use in this one, is Texaco. I don't know if y'all know the Texaco case. I may remember Texaco, pretty interesting case. So Texaco is being sued for discriminating against minorities, especially African Americans, for promotion. And so the executives at Texaco get together to talk about it. And some guy decides to tape the cassette tape. Y'all don't know what a cassette tape is. Anybody? Has anyone ever seen one before?
Yes,
I found mine from junior high and was putting them out on YouTube because they still work. It's amazing after all these years. But he decided to record. Now the articles I've read said they didn't know he was recording. I've seen some where he was just recording because he's taking notes. So, but supposedly no one in the room knew he was recording, but he's recording. This is a firm being sued by minorities, and he's recording these executives using racial expletives that I won't repeat because they're really horrendous. In this meeting, he's recording it. So he finally leaves the company and he decides to send the cassettes to the Justice Department as part of there. And it causes this incredible blow up for Texaco. I don't even know if Texaco really even survived based on that. Of course, the CEO does what? He apologizes, we're really embarrassed, but he doesn't say anything that he says has nothing to do with our minority lawsuit. We're not treating minorities poorly. If you heard what they said, it kind of makes you think that, yeah, that's probably exactly what's going on. It sure sounds, because these are executives saying that. What if you work for a firm where that's your CEO, and do you know that? I'm going to give you one CEO scenario of that. How do you know your views of your CEO? You're not going to figure that out, and your CEO can certainly embarrass you. You've seen several of those. So I want to do something even more, probably even crazier for me to do, but the one I've been thinking about, y'all ready for this? The Me Too movement. So when the Me Too movement hit, I started thinking about my career at USA, and 5 scenarios came to mind. I'm only going to give you 3 of them. But here's my question, all right? The 3 scenarios I had, nothing happened, no one got any in trouble, no one cared. I'm curious if today, what you think it'd be today. All right? I know what my opinion is, and I just explained, you can hear me use the word naive quite a few times, but I was incredibly naive when I started my career. I had no idea there were people like this in the world. I didn't know they existed, or if they did exist, I thought they'd at least be smart enough to keep their mouths shut, but they weren't. So And I'm curious, and you can do all this anonymously. You can do it by clicker, you can do it anonymously, write it down. But I'm curious, when you hear the scenario, if today people say, no big deal, men are just men, right? I have two where it's just kind of the other way, where it's, you know, but I won't give you those two, but men will just be men. Not too bad. Needs to be pointed out, you know, just, hey, just letting you know. Concerning, this person needs to go to counseling. Very concerning. There's going to be some reprimand. Someone should be fired. All right. You'll see the scenarios here. Y'all ready for the first scenario? All right. I should probably cut this out of the video. You know, 30 years from now, y'all, this will be so offensive. Y'all take it to the nursing home where I am, and y'all get me kicked out of the nursing home, which is fine. But the first one, so I started USA. I'm like, you know, I didn't think about these issues at all. 4 of my first bosses were women, and they were wonderful bosses. USA had a lot of women in management, but not at top management. They started working on that later, but I didn't even think about it. But USA hired some guy to run a, I forget what they called it. It was women in the workforce or something. How do we treat women fairly kind of thing. And I was kind of curious how people are going to react, but all my peers are like, wow, that's great. We're glad USA is doing that. There was none of this rolling the eyes and why are we doing that? So we say, wow, this is great. We really like this. Mainly because we're working with people that we thought, you know, we wanted them people treated really well, regardless of gender. But then we heard who they hired for this job. It was this old colonel guy who had nothing to do with gender relations. Everybody knew the only reason he was hired is because he's a good friend of the CEO and they needed to find him a job. So I'm like, okay, great. So we just said, forget about it. It's all for show. We're not going to do anything. Well, then a few months later, I got into this management training program, which was a great honor for me. You know, all of us got in there. We're like the future leaders of USA. We all loved it. It's great. We went through the program. We got to see all these presentations. We got to know each other. And then they came to the graduation. And guess who's going to shake your hands at the graduation? This guy, head of the gender relations department. So that's fine. This is this old kind of, you know, your weird uncle kind of guy. Everybody loved him. We're all nice. And so we're in a big circle. They call out our names. Each person goes up. They shake his hand. The HR people are there. They hand us a little diploma that we all threw away afterwards, but at least we knew we passed the class. And so he shakes our hands. The first guy goes through. The second guy goes through. And then the third person is a female. He doesn't shake her hand. Guess what he does? Gives her an incredibly inappropriate hug, not just hug, but a hug like that. She's shocked because she wasn't expecting that. And some guy in the line goes, woohoo, like this. Well, that egged this guy on. So now this old school guy, he's like, yeah, so now he's not, this is the part that really affects me the most. He's no longer, he doesn't care about the guys anymore. Like when we walked by, he was like, yeah, get out of here. He's like rubbing his hands the next woman he sees coming. And the way he rubs his hand, you could tell, just based on his view of the person coming, how attractive or unattractive he might have thought. So I'm sitting there thinking on this, again, what am I naive, right? I'm sitting here thinking, boy, I'd hate to be a woman right now. And then I just said, you know, I'm kind of curious. So I look at the end of the line and all the women, guess what their faces are? Absolute horror. They do not want to go any further. They're just horrified to have to go through this. And I'm feeling really bad for them. I mean, think about it. They're in this program that's very honorable, right? They've just been told by USA, you're a future leader of USA. And the very end of this program, I can tell looking at their face. I wish I had pictures, right, of their faces. Can y'all imagine their faces? I mean, how would you feel if you're in this situation? All right, so I'm going to put it. Is anyone in iClicker? Because I'm kind of curious. All right, let's try it. Let's see if it works. How do I do it? Multiple choice. And then go. Is it working?
Yeah.
All right. If you don't have iClicker, just write it on a piece of paper. Let me know when your 9 responses, okay. someone on the chat, but I don't want to show it because he may be voting or she may be voting. I don't want to. Y'all got it? Do y'all want to see the results or not? Yeah. Someone gonna be offended if I show you the results? All right. So one, not too big. What was the second one? Counseling needing, reprimanded, fired. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting one because who should have acted? Now, start with me. What should I have done? You're in my position, entry level. This guy is a good friend of the CEO. Would you have changed what I should have done?
Well, I mean, you didn't really do anything, right? Just kind of,
I didn't do anything, no, other than look at the faces of the women. Yeah.
I guess there's nothing you can really do in that situation, but somebody should have been like, can't do that.
Yeah, I was kind of wishing that the next guy in line would have forced him to hug him.
You should have hugged him.
Huh?
You should have hugged him.
Well, that's why I wasn't next in line though. I was pretty far back. It was probably 60% men, 40% women, so it was a little bit skewed toward the men. What about the HR people there? What could they have done?
Really take them off stage.
Take them off stage, move them back. I mean, you got to think, what's his reaction going to be? So could they say, hey, handshakes only, please? I tell you what, why don't we do handshakes? You handle that. I don't know how the reaction would be. They would have been taking a risk, right? They're talking, this is someone that's, you know, pretty well known. Do you blame the guy or do you think he should have known better? I mean, think about President Bush Sr. I don't know at the end of his life, he saw the really inappropriate jokes he was making and the inappropriate touching he was doing, but he didn't really get too much trouble with that. I think partly because people on the other side wanted to kind of promote him at his death over Trump. I mean, it's kind of, there's a lot of politics going on. But he did some things, and the argument people were making, well, he's just old school. That's the way he's kind of, is that an excuse anymore? Can anyone be quite that ignorant given everything in the news? What if you have a CEO like that? What are you going to do? Is that enough to get you to leave the company? So when you see my third story, I think you'll see that pretty cool. And there's people in the chat. Can I click on the chat? Hug them back. Yeah, that was certainly one that could have worked. Okay, interesting. All right, we'll see. Any other comments? It's pretty infuriating, right? That you're in that situation. Do you just say, let's just get through this and forget about it? Or do we need to do something? Are we at a stage now that every single situation is going to be addressed because we're just sick and tired of it? Or are we going to say, hey, he's an old geezer. He's going to die in 5 years. Let's just let him go and, who knows? So, all right, I don't know if I click off of this or what. What do I do next? Do I do more?
No, I think you stop.
I'll stop. Okay, stop. All right, you ready for the second one?
Yes.
I don't know how to get rid of it.
Just say results.
Oh, okay, thanks. All right, so this one, I was in a job where I was working ridiculous overtime. I mean, ridiculous overtime, 7 days a week. Extremely. I was also doing my master's in the CFA exam, so I did nothing but study and work. So we were hiring a technician to help me. It's like, thank goodness, let's get someone in here. Well, my boss didn't hire someone in 2 weeks. It took him 6 months to hire people because he had this person interview with everybody in the company, even people that didn't work with us. And so he had this lady come in, a young lady come in. She was interviewing people. So I went and talked to the interviewers. Several of them gave me incredibly inappropriate remarks about, obviously you're going to hire, look how good looking she is. I was getting those kind of reports from officers of the company. I was like pretty shocked that they would say, including the guy from HR. I won't repeat what he said, but trust me, you'd be pretty shocked. But anyways, we hire her. She comes in. I'm so thankful to get some work to somebody else. So I'm not there 7 days a week. But she's in a new position. It was called technician. There was only a few of them at USAA. So the HR people said, we want to interview these people. We want to see what the responsibilities are, what they're doing, make sure that, the training's equal, the workload's equals. So I was like, fine, we just hired a person, so I don't have overtime. Now she's going to sit in interviews for 20 hours a week or whatever. So it's like, great. I was, at the point I was like, whatever. So anyway, she's been interviewing with this guy, and then she sits right across from me. I'll call her S. Okay, is that all right? She sits right across from me. I'm ignoring the whole thing. This guy's interviewing. I'm like, whatever, interviewer, just get it done so we can get stuff done. Have you ever heard the phrase, you could feel someone staring at you? I don't think there's any chemistry behind that the human body can actually produce, but I felt someone staring at me. There was no question. So I look up kind of shocked, and S is staring at me, not just staring at me, but she has this horrified look on her face. And I'm kind of like, what's going on? So I stand up and completely lie. I go, S, I really need that report from you as soon as possible. I didn't need any report from her. She played along immediately. Says, "Yeah, oh, sorry, Ron, I'll get it to you immediately. This guy left." So I'm like, okay, well, what just happened? He was sitting incredibly close to her to begin with, just right next to her. And I was like, that I noticed. So I go, what happened? What happened to us? She started telling me the things he was saying to her. This is a guy probably 30 years older than she was. I won't tell you the things he said because I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I'll tell you one thing he did say. There's a picture of her on her desk with her husband. Now, I was in graduate school with her husband. He's a big guy. He could have beat this guy up from HR if he wanted to. He looks at the picture of her with her husband and he comments on how sexy she is. He didn't use the word sexy, but how sexy she was in this picture. She was incredibly upset. I asked her what she wanted to do about it. She said, I don't want to do anything. I just don't want to interview him with again. So we didn't report it. We just said no more interviews. I decided to do what she asked for. Her thought process, now this is something I probably would change. I went back, but I'll get your input. Her thought process, I just started a new job at a new company. I don't want to look like the troublemaker. Just get this guy out of my life, and I don't want anything to do with it again. So I just honored what she asked, but we didn't tell anybody. All right, so there you go. There's the scenario. I'm asking about, remember, this is an HR person.
Yeah.
All right, this is not that it's okay for non-HR people, but anyway, all right, you ready? Is it working?
Yeah.
People are voting on the chat, but I'll have to look at the chat afterwards. Oh, that was fast. Everybody voted? You want to see the results? All right, that one's a little more skewed, 16. Yeah, I think he should have actually been fired for that.
Yeah.
That's pretty serious. I thought it was pretty shocking that he would comment on her photo with her husband. That to me just seems incredible. So what should she have done or I should have done there? Is this something we should go? The head of HR was a woman. She probably would have been pretty open to our complaints. What do y'all think in this case? This one's open and shut. What was the C? Concerning counseling needing. So you think counseling? Comments on this one?
I think you handled the situation well. Like picking up on her being uncomfortable and finding a way to get him out of the situation and then afterwards to with HR.
Well, I was naive back then, as you know. So do you think it's different today than back then? You know, today, if I didn't do anything, you know, I know at UTSA, if something like that happens, there's like this whole protocol you've got to go through. Even if a person says, no, I don't want to report it, you're still required to report it as a professor. I didn't talk to my boss about it, and she just didn't want to give any, I think she mainly just didn't want to be looked like a troublemaker, which is pretty sad, right? That someone reporting something like that would be a troublemaker. What would y'all have done in that situation?
They reported it on her behalf, or like anonymously, and like just say, hey, this happened. I was in the room. I was super uncomfortable. The person asked me not to say her name, so I'm going to respect that. But this is the person that made the inappropriate comments, and I don't want to be in the same room with another woman like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to figure it out when it comes down to his level, though, probably. But yeah, I knew the head of HR pretty well back then, and she was someone I could have called and talked to. But I was a peon myself. Is that a case where if you were in a position, you would have gone through your boss and let your boss decide what to do? Would that have been a case? And if your boss didn't do anything, say, well, I tried, or is that? I mean, you're going to be in an entry-level job here pretty soon, right?
I think the problem with like not reporting it is it might become like a recurring thing.
Yeah.
So that's something.
Yeah. And he was probably a married man and, who knows? So I kind of, I hadn't thought of it before, Ryan. He's probably done this multiple times before. If he feels that comfortable approaching a complete stranger like that, it's infuriating that someone would, we talk about what a hostile work environment, that someone do something that's so obviously, to me, the shock in the Me Too movement was, I think the most shock was Charlie Rose. I don't know if y'all saw his story. There's some people, I think, they just, I don't know, they've lost all consciousness or something. Y'all know the Charlie Rose story? None of y'all have seen that? I mean, this is a pretty famous guy, right? He's got these interns that really want to be associated with his thing because he's really famous. So he's invited them over to his condo in New York. And they're pretty excited. Wow, I'm going to get to meet with Charlie Rose. It's going to grow my career. They come over right in the middle of the meeting. He strips down, goes to the bathroom, takes a shower with the door open. What do you think at that point? This has nothing to do with my career, right? I mean, now he got fired, right? And he's out of his job. I don't know what he's doing now, but like, is he mentally ill? What is the issue with, is it power? Some people get so much power that just doesn't even cross their mind how ridiculous. Isn't that just, am I really that naive? Is that just really, do normal people do that? Anybody? Anybody here do that? Say, hey, I'm gonna take a shower now. Just maybe yesterday, but I mean, that's just insanity. So I don't get it. All right. One last one. Okay, you just told me how to do it, and I don't know how to do it. Okay. All right, this one, there's a guy at USA, very high ranking, second highest ranking guy in the company. He was going to take General McDermott's place. He was in line. I really didn't like this guy at all. He had a reputation for being a little bit of a narcissist. I remember, part of my advancement was, hey, you get to go have lunch with this guy. And I knew what that meant. We all dreaded it. Go have lunch with this guy because it was 30 minutes of him talking to us. And then you had to ask him a question. And if you asked a stupid question, you were done. So I was going around the company, what question can I ask? I didn't care what his answer was. I just wanted a question where I asked it and he reacted normally. That was my whole goal. I didn't like this guy at all. Fortunately, Bob Harris came along and became the next CEO. So this guy, some of you may know this guy, so I'm sorry but I won't say his name. But I'm thinking, thank goodness this guy's name. This one thing you have to really be cautious of with your firm is when you change a CEO, it's incredibly risky. CEOs bring a lot of baggage with them. So anyway, the guy was gone. I was so happy. And Bob Davis, General Harris, boy, he was a wonderful CEO. I really liked the guy, man of incredible integrity. So I don't know how USA would have survived if we had this CEO. If he's your uncle, I'm sorry, but I just did not like this guy at all. But a few years later, I went on a bike trip in Virginia, and I didn't know any people there. I went by myself and met all these people the first time. And there was another lady there from Goldman Sachs. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Someone that's in the same field. And she goes, oh, you're at USA. Let me tell you a story. I said, okay, tell me a story. That's interesting. So USA, she was young, right out of college. USA is just about to borrow in public markets. Never done it before. This is a very important relationship. They're interviewing banks. I don't know what, they're at this offsite place at a hotel. So Goldman Sachs USA is there. She makes her presentation. Everything's great. This guy's there, the second highest ranked person at USA, probably an important person to impress, right? Of all the people there. Presentation goes great. Everything's done. She goes to her room. She's dressed. She's in a nightgown or whatever, in a robe. Someone knocks at her door. You want to guess who's at her door? This guy's at the door. He invites her to go have cocktails with him at like 10 o'clock at night. She says, no, thank you, and closes the door, which is incredible courage on her part, given that she could be destroying this entire deal. This guy's a married 60-something-year-old man. I was shocked when she told me the story. The thing that got me really shocked, though, and I hadn't thought about it until she's mentioned it, she goes, then I started thinking, how did he know what room I was in? And I was thinking, yeah, that's a good question. So he actually did detective work to track her down. I mean, how would you find someone's room number in a hotel? The hotel is not going to tell you, I would hope. So, but that was the scenario. I'm now extremely glad he did not become our CEO, even more so than before when he was just mean to me. But all right, so there's the scenario. Remember, he's the second highest ranked person at USA. So this is not some HR technician guy. All right, ready, go. I think there was 24 last time, but you can not vote if you want to. Is that everybody? You want to see the results? Yeah, this one looks skewed like the last one. Now, could you actually fire this person? I mean, think about it. Who knows? The Goldman Sachs lady and him. So who's actually going to fire this guy? All right, let's say you're the Goldman Sachs person. What would you do? Would you tell your boss?
Good with you.
This is a pretty awkward situation, isn't it? She told me, but this was years later. But if you're this Goldman Sachs person, would you tell your boss? I was pretty impressed with her. She's a very confident person, so I think she was like, "Yeah, just get rid, go away, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you." What if they had lost the business because of that? Would you tell your boss? So you're saying the E people, tell me the E people, how would you actually fire this guy?
I mean, you can talk to your boss and be like, say, you know, this person randomly like, found my room somehow, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, can you talk with their CEO or something? Even if it's not necessarily to fire that person, you can just be like, can you talk to them? Like, you know, you shouldn't, like, one, it's making your company look bad. Two, like, they did show up to your room, like, unannounced, without any knowledge of where your actual room is.
Yeah.
Kind of just creepy. Plus, like, you can also, I probably talked to the hotel too, be like, you know, some like front desk, give them my room number, to come with some kind of weird story about him knowing me or something like that.
Yeah, I'd want to know where he got the room number. Now, if he got it from her boss, that would open up a whole nother Pandora's box. This one irritated me. It just probably shocked me the most because USA's bidding for business and she's just presented. So the implications are pretty stark in this situation. Not that I've been good in any other situation, but it's just like, you know, from his standpoint, for him, he didn't even think that. Just seems, you know, you can kind of see the character of this guy, right? We're in a bidding company, you know, this is just completely. So anyway, now the people on C, you don't have to speak for yourself. I don't know who's going to counsel this guy other than the CEO. So I don't, in that case, I don't really know. I mean, if he met this guy, I don't think most of y'all like him either. He was a very narcissistic kind of person, which is my least kind of, you know, I want people that you can debate and feel comfortable around. Everybody was scared to death of this guy. And so it was just, you know, kind of awkward. But anyway, so that's what I was raised with. Now, should I have done anything? This was like 5 years later, the guy's already gone. At that point, does anyone care? Doesn't really matter. So, you know, interesting. But has the world changed that much? You know, what are the scenarios today? You can kind of imagine it. Are there some 50 and 60 people my age out there that are still clueless that the world has changed? You know, those kind of things. I think you're going to probably face some of that. The other thing you got to think about is that you might be the clueless person 20 years from now. And how do you make sure you're paying attention to what's going on? You know, there's interesting stories out there. We've seen several of them here recently. But anyway, that's my Me Too movement. As soon as that movement came out, those 5 stories came to mind. I gave you 3 of them. And just my naivety was, my shock that there was people actually like that in existence in this world, and you want to kind of just beat them up, right? That's your first response. I just want to sock this guy in the head, face, which is another bad characteristic to have. All right. So anyway, the world is changing. You got to be careful what you put on Facebook. You got to be careful what you put on social media. Even if you didn't mean it, or you meant it as a joke, everything gets misinterpreted or reinterpreted. I know a guy from USA. He didn't like his boss, and every day on Facebook, what a horrible person she was. I knew his mom, so I emailed his mom and said, he needs to take all of that down, because guess what can happen if you do that? Guess what did happen? He was fired very quickly after that, because a lot of people on there knew her and him. It was an incredibly stupid thing to do. But so you just got to be really careful of this day and age. I think some of it's overkill. I saw one video. This is, this cult, people talk about the cancel culture. I think sometimes it's overdone on the left and the right. I saw one of a Pete Mark accountant. She posted some video and they fired her for threatening violence. And I watched it and said, well, she wasn't threatening violence. She was just making an analogy, but she got fired. I thought that was a little overkill, but she was probably still stupid to make the video. But does that mean we're scared to say anything? There's no more those kind of things. But once you become an officer of a company, it becomes, everything you do is scrutinized. So you do lose a lot of your privacy. You can't be the CEO of USA and posting stuff on Facebook, that could anyway be misinterpreted or reinterpreted. All right. So a few last quotes on operational risk. The biggest argument people make on operational risk is that you can't measure it. And we're going to study Hubbard here pretty soon. He says the exact opposite. It's the stuff that's the hardest to measure. It's the stuff you should be putting down, putting something down. So reputational risk. That's an extremely difficult thing to measure. All three of those scenarios I gave you today might have blown up much worse than they did, because at my time, nothing happened. Could have been much bigger, but who knows? How do you measure something like that? How do you figure that out? But he says the whole point of doing this analysis is to assess the most uncertain stuff. It's the most uncertain stuff that's the most important from a risk management. If all you do is measure the stuff you can measure, that's probably your least risky stuff anyway, because you can measure it. It's the other stuff you need to put down. So we'll see what he says on how you can do that and actually watch his video. We're going to talk about pre-mortem and post-mortem. Pre-mortem and post-mortem. I have some good doctor friends in Costa Rica. I've been meaning to ask them if doctors even talk about post-mortem. Is that really a doctor's term? I don't know, but pre-mortem, have you heard of pre-mortem? It's a really good technique. You have a decision, you've made the decision, but before you implement, you all sit down and say, okay, it's a year from now, everything failed. Let's go through the list of all the things that failed. And it gets you into that mode of thinking the other side. We'll talk about that. Annie Duke does a great job on the pre-mortem and post-mortem. I'm a big believer in pre-mortem. It's actually quite an effective way to keep yourself out of trouble. But essentially assuming you failed in advance and then thinking about it. Prediction markets. What we've discovered, if you ask a crowd to vote, to put a bid in, especially if there's money involved, that the intelligence of crowds is better than the intelligence of individuals, even individuals that are experts. Do y'all watch any of these prediction markets? Let's see, I don't know how to get out of this guy. I want to leave, end, yes, end class. So I don't know if it keeps what I just did, so we'll see. I think PredictIt's probably the biggest one. So will Macron be reelected? Probably 90% chance, right, at this point, but it's starting to, it always tends to wane a little bit. Who's the 2024 presidential nominee? Right now, Trump's ahead of DeSantis, 40 cents to 30 cents. You could bet on that. 2024, boy, I wouldn't vote for either one of those. I wouldn't think right now, but you know, you get into the process. I mean, you think about this point for George W. Bush, boy, he was the most popular president in the history of the world because of 9/11. You know, 1 year, 2 years make a big difference. I just can't imagine what Joe Biden's gonna be, what, 81? And Trump's gonna be what, 80? My mom's 81. She's not gonna be the president of, you know, she's a very smart lady, but she's not gonna be anybody's president now. She's kind of slowed down a little bit. But they have all these vet predictions. You can actually go in there and bet on them. Pretty interesting, very interesting things. US elections, obviously they're talking about the upcoming congressional elections, who's going to take the House, who's going to take the Senate. These are actually more accurate than the talking heads on the TV stations. So they're pretty interesting. I love them in sporting events. I think it's really, really interesting. I don't quite understand them in sporting events. I'm not sure exactly what they're voting on. So maybe y'all can explain this to me. So pretty good, it was a pretty good March Madness, wasn't it? Some pretty good games. Every year there always are. And I think the finals was in a particularly great game. I looked at the score, I don't know, around 9, 10 o'clock. I said, okay, Kansas is going to lose. So I went to bed. So how good of a job did they do? Now, what I don't understand, y'all can explain this to me. They say UNC has an 87.8% chance of winning. I don't think that's actually what it is. But y'all can tell me. I think 87.8% think that North Carolina is going to win. But I think if you ask them what percentage, what probably they thought that North Carolina win, I think they might say 60%. So y'all see what I mean? Because I would not think they had an 87% chance of winning. This is Kansas. They're only down by 15. That's not that hard to come back on. So I might have said, yeah, I think UNC is going to win, but I'll give them about a 60% chance. Is that right? This is the percentage of people who think they're going to win, or is this the percentage that they, they think they have an 88% chance of winning? I don't know who would bet against Kansas with that much time left, only down by 15. But you can definitely see it, right? Kansas is coming back. Kansas is coming back. Now they're down by 5. Now they're down. Now they tie. Now they got the momentum. But then UNC, at this point, it's UNC's up by 2 points at the very end. There's some pretty interesting ones. I love watching these at the end. That Super Bowl. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl where, who was it? Seattle. Who passed it on?
Yes, yeah.
Pass it on first down. So that was a really cool one at the very end. It's just a whipsaw, right? I mean, obviously they're going to win the game. So they're pretty interesting. I just don't know what that percentage represents, but I love watching these things. I find them really, really interesting. I don't know what kind of money you can make on these. I'm not a bettor. I'm not a gambler, but KU starts off with a pretty big advantage. UNC starts getting ahead. They get ahead. I think by as much as 15 was the max. Oh no, there's 17 there. Or not 12. No, I can't. No, that's only 7. So I think 15 was 15 points was the max. Obviously, you're going to think that team's going to win at that point. It's pretty obvious. And the football, the reason I really don't think this is true is a team gets up by 7 and people are saying there's an 80% chance. I mean, there's obviously not 80% chance they're going to win. It's just 80% think they will win. And obviously the team ahead has a more likely chance of winning. So prediction markets are interesting. They have proven themselves to be more effective than the experts, mainly because the experts have no skin in the game. So the question is, how do you create prediction markets inside a corporation? How do you set up a prediction market in Valero to forecast oil prices or gasoline prices? Can you even do that? Is it even legal? Can Valero have their employees betting with each other on what the price is going to be, even though you know that's going to be a better forecast than what your expert's going to give you? So I find it very interesting. Have any of y'all, I shouldn't ask y'all if you're gamblers, but have any of y'all tried these markets? Is it easy to get into?
Well, are you talking about like sports betting or?
Well, sports betting are prediction markets.
Technically, it's not legal in Texas.
Yeah, so we won't.
It is?
Well, and with the internet, it's like everything has changed. And I don't know, even on these prediction markets, if it's legal for us to get into this. Yeah, I mean, obviously, some of these are pretty obvious. I would certainly take these bets. Cuomo running for statewide office again, that's, you know, it seems ridiculous, but
So for those, would House and Senate representatives be allowed to bet on that, or would that be? Like,
I don't know how much money you can make doing this. I would guess if a House person voted on himself and then, or voted against himself and then put out a really bad campaign, I would assume that'd be pretty illegal. I mean, it's certainly legal in sports, right? If you're Pete Rose or whoever. So yeah, I don't know. You know, Cheney's an interesting one, right? I mean, that's one that's going to be very much in the news right now. They're saying she's not going to win. The polls are pretty obvious to do that. Look at that, but there's still 22 people, 22 cents saying she could win. I find it really interesting, and that's why I recommend that that book, Super Forecasters. It's a really interesting book. Who are the best forecasters, and what is it about them to make them good forecasters? And the first thing is they don't trust their own confidence. They realize they're pretty ignorant. They don't, so they're very quick to change their opinion once new information comes in. That's the key, and that's the key to success in finance. You don't invest your ego ever. You're willing to say, hey, I was wrong, and you change your opinion. That's the people who are going to do the best in these markets. As soon as new information comes in, they look at it, they're hungry for information. They're actually hungry for information to change their opinion. If you can get yourself in that kind of mindset, you'll do far better in finance. You'll be a far better forecaster. And that's confirmation bias. We'll talk about some of that. Confirmation bias is the death for finance majors. You state your opinion, and then you start looking for anything that confirms that opinion. That's just a horrible way to do finance. You gotta somehow get so that you can say, hey, I was wrong, we're changing our opinion. So I do love these. These are great things. They've proven themselves. They really are quite, the statistics is really quite overwhelming. And then this last one is be willing to go against the grain and ask questions that no one else is asking. So this guy, the least favorite TED Talk in the history of TED, Bjorn Lomborg. I encourage you to watch this TED Talk. The place was, you know, you had crickets chirping. They did not like his talk. I thought it was excellent, even though, you know, whether I don't know if I agree with him or not. I'm not a climate expert. He wasn't saying global warming wasn't happening. He actually said global warming is happening. He wasn't saying it wasn't going to be bad. He said it was going to be terrible. He wasn't even saying, I don't think we should spend money on it. What he was saying is, it's bad. It's going to be horrible. I wonder if we couldn't though spend the money somewhere else that's better. That was his question.
Isn't that guy in the comments?
Huh?
Isn't that guy in the comments not a climate scientist, but?
No, he's he's an economist. Yeah.
Yeah.
He has a website. He has a website where they go around and look at the biggest problems in the world and what we should fix. I thought one thing is interesting, and that's why, and you know, I'm not an expert on this, so I have no idea if anything he said is true, but what I liked about him is it's all data. Give me the data. So he said, some people are saying global warming could end the planet for all time, so we should be spending trillions of dollars on it. He says, that's true. There is that scenario, but he said, but there's a scenario with a higher probability of an asteroid hitting the Earth and destroying the entire Earth. So if global warming has a 0.0001% chance of destroying us, but an asteroid has a 0.01% chance, maybe we should be spending the money on a machine that can destroy asteroids. Now, I don't know if he's right or not, but is that a legitimate question to ask? Let's look at the data. Let's figure it out. Let's make the best decision. He actually thinks we're probably better off. His data says we're better off spending more money on malaria, tuberculosis. He talked about other things that are causing people misery, that what he thinks is going to cause more people misery than global warming. I don't know if his numbers are right, but tuberculosis kills a lot of people every year. And they could come up with a shot that takes care of tuberculosis, malaria. He's saying, let's spend the trillions of dollars there. I don't know. I'm not, you know, y'all are going to get me canceled here. I don't know the math. I'm not an expert in those areas. I have a lot of friends on Facebook who are omniscient, and, you know, omniscient people. What's amazing to me is they're omniscient and they completely disagree with my other friend who's omniscient. And I don't know how that's true. You have two all-knowing people who disagree with each other. I'm not all-knowing about anything. So I like listening to these people and just hear what they have to say. But he does have a website where he and other economists, other experts, they go through each one of these issues and they just ask the question, what are the statistics? Where should we be spending our money? How much more bang for the buck can we get here versus there? I'm glad people are asking those questions. You can still disagree with them. But he was not well received in that TED Talk. Well, I'm surprised they didn't like kick him off the stage, but anyway. All right, so we covered purchasing power, we covered currency risk. So, all right, any questions on all the risks? We got them all down, right? Operating risk, this covers almost everything else. So I'm going to shift gears here and cover these 4 people that I think are the best thinkers in risk management. If you find a better one, let me know. I'm always open to adding more people. I do recommend you read all of their books. I haven't read all of their books, but I've read all but one of their books. They're all very good writers. They're not overly technical. So they're all readable. They're all interesting. They all have something very unique to say, although Annie Duke does draw a whole lot on Kahneman. Doug Hubbard's kind of off on his own, and you're going to watch his video. I think you're going to enjoy his video. I wish I could get him here at UTSA. So you've all heard of Taleb, right? What did he write? His famous book, Black Swan. I actually like Fooled by Randomness a little bit better, but Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness. He also wrote Anti-Fragile. We'll talk about Anti-Fragile. I was not a big fan of Anti-Fragile, but I love the idea. I think Anti-Fragile could have been 1 chapter, and he made it several chapters. I do strongly recommend that you go out to YouTube and you watch the YouTube video of Kahneman interviewing Taleb. It is quite fascinating. I think you'll see which one is the bigger thinker. I mean, obviously Kahneman's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, but he has Taleb squirming in that interview, so it's really quite interesting interview. But they both, it's very, very interesting. I don't know if any of y'all have seen it yet, but it's just really, really fascinating. I think it's a good hour long, really good. So, you know, you're doing your treadmill, just put that on and watch it. You do need to watch it, so don't just listen to it, because it's kind of fun to watch Taleb squirming. So these 2 masterminds are really, now Kahneman was interviewing them, so it really wasn't Kahneman versus Taleb, but Kahneman asked a question, completely destroyed Taleb, and Kahneman go, okay, and then ask his next question. It's like, Taleb's like, oh no, what do I do? So, you know, these are smart people, and they're asking questions and they're challenging each other. It's great. This is what we need in risk. Annie Duke, she takes Kahneman. Kahneman is a lot of great thoughts that you're like, what do I do with this? And Annie Duke comes along and says, well, here's what you do with it. So she's the practical one. I read both her books. I don't recommend her second book. Sorry, Annie Duke. I don't recommend her second book. It's essentially the first book twice, but her first book I thought was quite exceptional. And she is really exceptional on blogs, podcasts, and YouTube videos. She's a very, very good speaker. She always, every time she speaks, she's always come up with a new scenario. And that's one thing she's really good at, is what Kahneman, I think, really struggles with. Annie Duke comes up with really practical examples to make her point, like the Seattle game. What was the Seattle and New England? Is that it? I can't remember now. She comes up with some really, really good scenarios, even though it gets her in trouble in her speeches, because all these people are like, no, Seattle was stupid to do that. And then Doug Hubbard, I think, is my favorite now, mainly because he's telling us we can do this much better than we are. We're just not trying very hard. And here's exactly what you should do. And he is passionate about this. This is the guy I was on the phone with for the longest time. I was just calling to see if he could come to UTSA, and he wanted to just talk risk management. And every 10 minutes he'd tell me, well, I'm rushing to a meeting, so I can't talk much longer. And then he would keep talking. I'm just sitting there just listening. It's like, I'm fine with that. You should see him on Amazon.com. People will comment on his book on Amazon.com, and guess who the respondent is? It's Doug Hubbard. And he keeps going. This one poor college student responded, and Doug Hubbard came back with paragraphs. And the student said one other thing, and he came back with more paragraphs. And the student said, I give up. Leave me alone. So he's passionate about this. I'd love to get, you know, like same thing with like the Obamas. I'd love to get stuck in a car ride with him across the country and just talk. He would want to talk nothing but risk. That's all he wants to talk about. I would love that. It'd be a great Great ride. All right, so let's start with Taleb. So I've got quotes from Taleb. What I did with Taleb is I gave you the book, and unfortunately I gave you the page number, assuming you have the exact same edition I had. So hopefully that's the case. If you look on page 57, that's not there, then buy another edition, all right? Because I don't know which edition I had. But what I want to do with Taleb is see his quotes. His quotes are really good. He's a very, very crafty writer. He knows how to put things in very interesting ways. But what I want to do is take what he said, but organize it in categories, all right? Because on the final, you have these 4 writers. I can't remember how I did the final exam question, that you have to pick one of them or 2 of them. I can't remember. So figure out which of these that really impressed you the most, and then you're going to kind of talk about what they were saying about risk, okay? So let this sink in. Take advantage of this time to kind of let what they're doing sink in. So I'll organize it in categories. It comes from 4 books: Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness. Most of my quotes are from there. Anti-Fragile doesn't have many quotes, but he does bring up, I think, a really, really interesting concept. His concept that you can't measure risk, but you can measure fragility, I think is incredibly important. So I want to bring that up. And then this last one, there may be one quote out of there. It wasn't really his biggest book. I think he needed more money, so he wrote another book, kind of thing. I think that's kind of what Annie Duke did. You know, you have that kind of, you know, you hit the bestseller list, you better get another book out there. So he might have just done that. So his points are, first of all, the over-reliance of the normal distribution in finance. The second thing is we get fooled by randomness. And in fact, not only get fooled by randomness, but we're actually paid bonuses by doing just purely random things. And he gives so many examples in his books of people who got big bonuses, and the next year they were fired because what they were doing is actually very, very risky, but they were just lucky. They got a big bonus, and the next year they're fired because the world blew up. The next thing I have them down is finance. Finance is fooled by randomness, very closely related to the other one. We'll get into this one. A lot of it is your boss's fault. Your boss needs something, so you got to do something. You go find data. The data is not all that strong, but it gives you something, so you use it. So you have something. We're kind of pushed. We're kind of incentivized to do bad statistics. Taleb does not like experts. He doesn't like elites. He says they know far less than we think they do, and in fact, some of them have been wrong 10 times in a row, and they're still on the TV talking. Why? Because they're really confident. That's that confidence factor. Massive but rare. So this is the big thing with Black Swan. It's not that black swans happen and we're surprised. He says black swans happen and they're actually the only thing that does matter. We see a black swan, we say that'll never happen again, let's not worry about it. He's saying, no, that's the only thing you should be worried about. That's the only thing that matters. And it's absolutely true. Your life is going to be decided probably in about 7 minutes over your life. My entire life was probably decided in about 7 minutes. 7 minutes of conversations. Do y'all believe that? I was in college and I needed a major because I couldn't make money in music. So I got my music theory degree. You know, they actually laughed at me when they gave me the degree. And in fact, I was auditioning for an ensemble and the conductor's like, why would you be a music theory major? You can't make any money doing that. But I needed a new degree. So I asked this French horn player, and what should I do? I was thinking computer science or accounting. She said, don't do accounting. My roommate's an accountant, and she says it's really hard. So I became an accounting major. That was like a 1 minute conversation. I just decided my entire career based on that. And then another day, my boss, who normally walked that way and instead walked this way, I thought I'd show off and talk to him about a job on the board because he always wanted to talk careers. He went back to his desk, called the head of the department. I was working there 2 weeks later, shifted from accounting to finance like that. I had no desire to work in that job. I didn't want that job. So that's not even 7 minutes. That's like 47 seconds. Decided my entire life. You're going to run into someone in the elevator and it's going to be your spouse and you're going to have 4 kids instead of 2 because of that spouse instead of somebody else, right? Black swans decide everything. Most of your life is pretty uneventful and important. So he's saying we ignore black swans because they're rare and big. And he says that's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing we should be focused on. All right. That's where he gets in his most trouble with Kahneman. Because Kahneman says, yeah, you say we should focus on black swans. That's great for you. You can afford to do that. But the average person out there can't sit around for 6 years waiting for the next black swan. So you're going to see he really gets beat up by Kahneman on that point. But that's black swans is important. We're fooled by calmness. We prefer risk with low volatility with huge downside risk. That's our preference. So we're going to talk about that in contagion. Now, Doug Hubbard talks a lot about contagion. So we'll have to get in contagion as well. And so this is, again, this is what Taleb gets in trouble with Kahneman. Taleb says we should bet on the black swans. We should bet on fat tails. What he means by fat tails, there's things that the normal distributions say is absolutely impossible, but they happen, and they're going to happen. So we should bet on those things. He doesn't like forecasting. Doug Hubbard's going to talk about that as well. Doug Hubbard thinks we should forecast, but he's in my camp that forecasting is about distributions. It's not about, figuring out the future. So those are things he's going to talk about. So let's go through some of these quotes so you can see his points. So I don't know how many there were, 7 or 8 of those. His quotes, I think, are really, really good. So Taleb separates the world into 2 types of groups. There's I can't say these words. I wish he'd come up with something better. Mediocristan and extremistan. So mediocristan, that's where the normal distribution works really, really well. The example I'll always give is the average height of the average man in San Antonio. All right, so you go out and you survey 200 men in San Antonio over the age of 20. And you look at that and it says the probability that someone is 20 foot tall is 0. How much confidence do you have in that? You're pretty confident on that? The chances of the man that's 1 foot tall is 0. Are you confident in that one? Pretty confident. What would be the probability of David Robinson? 200 men in your distribution. Would it tell you it's impossible, or would it just tell you it's unlikely? 200 men, would that be enough to at least make David Robinson possible? It's kind of hard to say. I haven't done the math. Maybe you need 300. But if you did a survey of 200 men, and I told you David Robinson was 7 foot tall, would you just be absolutely shocked? It'd be believable, right? Because there'll probably be some 6'6" people, 6'7". So pretty good. Well, he says the world of finance is not mediocristan, it's extremistan. So it's not heights, it's wealth. So you go out and look at 200 people in San Antonio and you get their wealth. What's the probability of Red McCombs? Absolutely impossible. In fact, if you look at the statistics, the chances, what is Red McCombs worth? Anybody know? Is it more than 5 billion? I have no idea how much it is, but it's a lot of money, right? So let's say it's $5 billion. So you go out and survey 200 people, and it says not only is Red McCombs doesn't exist, but he's actually even less likely than a 20 foot tall man. It's absolutely impossible. In fact, Red McCombs, I don't know the statistics, but Red McCombs being made like a 120 foot tall man, right? You might have a couple of 2 million people with $2 million. Maybe someone with 3 million, but someone with $5 billion, that's just cannot happen. So he says the world's more like extremistan. That's why he's talking about. So how large does your sample size need to be to figure out the probability of Red McCombs? Well, your sample size isn't large enough until when? Red McCombs comes into your sample size. That's the only way you'll know he exists. So a larger sample size does what? It just fools you even more. A larger sample size makes Red McCombs even less likely. So you go to 500 people, you go to 1,000 people, even less likely. I don't know about, what is it, Tom Benson? I don't think he lives in San Antonio, doesn't he? He's from Dallas. So I don't know. I don't know the wealth in San Antonio. So I should go do my survey. But he says the world is more like extremistan, and yet finance acts as if we're a mediocristan. And what kind of mistakes do we make when we do that? We're more like wealth than we are like heights. So statistical inference and a large sample size help in the first world, but are dangerous in the second. We should always be suspicious of statistics and doubt the data. History tells what has happened, not what could happen. Now he gets a little silly. One of his examples is he could prove, I can't remember which George Bush, but let's say it's George W. Bush. He could prove George W. Bush was immortal. Y'all think George W. Bush is immortal? Anybody? But he can prove it. He's seen George Bush on the TV like 1,000 times and he hasn't died once. He's got a sample of 1,000 and George Bush has never died. Now that sounds ridiculous. He's actually using that example of exactly what we do in finance. He says it's never happened before, so it can never happen. He says we jump to that conclusion all the time. There's people who say the US stock market can't drop 80%. And I say, yeah, but the Japanese market dropped more than that. What's the difference? Why couldn't the US stock market drop 80%? So that's kind of his example. The other example he gives is the turkey example, which I think is pretty hilarious, but this turkey's getting fed. He's pretty happy. He looks at the sample size of his life. He's like, wow, this is really good. He's getting fed every day. He's really happy. And then September comes along. It's like, wow, the mean's going up. I'm getting fed more. My life's getting better. This distribution is actually improving. The mean's going up. November comes along. It's like, wow, it's even getting better. This is wonderful. He's looking at the sample size. This is the happiest he is, the most confident he is. And what should he be? This is the worst day of his life, and he's the most confident. Why? So he uses these examples. I think they're pretty humorous the way he does them. He does them a lot better than I do, but anyway. So sometimes a lot of data can be meaningless. At other times, one piece of information can be very meaningful. It is true that 1,000 days cannot prove you right, but one day can prove you wrong. That's kind of like that trying to prove the negative kind of thing. You just can't do it. Now, do you think finance does this? I had an actuary speak to my class several years ago, I think to this risk management class, and they had a question and answer, and one of the students brought up Taleb, and boy, this guy, he got real defensive. His actuaries, we don't do that. And he's probably true. Actuaries are much better at this than finance people, but he got real defensive. We don't make the stupid mistakes you guys in finance do. So, you know, he was a little defensive. We're going to see that with Doug Hubbard, because Doug Hubbard also really likes actuaries and engineers. So Doug Hubbard actually thinks finance has a lot to learn from actuarial science and engineering. Which is why I encourage finance students, don't work in finance your whole career. Go over and jump into these other areas. So you see the math that they're using and see how different it is. Forget everything you heard in statistics or probability theory. I don't recommend you do that because you're going to need it, even though we do it wrong. One of the most misunderstood aspects is this normal distribution. Its fragility and vulnerability, I can't say that word, whatever it is, in the estimation of tail events. The odds, and we saw this, right? The normal distribution, boy, it gets real thin in the tails. The odds of a 4 sigma move are twice that of a 4.15. The odds of a 20 sigma are a trillion times higher than a 21. So when you get out in the tails, it's saying this stuff is really unlikely to happen. Just small changes from going 20 sigma to 21 sigma. I mean, it's a universe of difference. Small measurement error in the sigma will lead to a massive underestimation of the probability. We can be 1 trillion times wrong about some events. So he talks about wealth in there. So he's using the exact same numbers I'm using here on wealth. You really can't, wealth does not follow a normal distribution at all. Boy, it's interesting. It's the number of billionaires in China. You would have thought in a socialist country there would never be billionaires, but there's more billionaires in China's main congressional body than there are in the US. I don't think there is a billionaire in the US Congress, and there's several of them in China's. If you went to China and surveyed 500 people, what would you get the probability of a billionaire? Because that's skewed a little bit more to the left in the US, right? Probably 15,000 per cap, and we're 40,000. It would be how many sigma events? I mean, you're talking way out there. So he's using Europe. I say go to China. You'd find it even more skewed. People will find data in which there were no jumps or extreme events and say that's proof that the normal distribution worked. This was exactly like my example of proof with O.J. Simpson. This was an example of the other one. He could prove O.J. Simpson wasn't a murderer because he saw him on TV many times and he didn't kill anybody. You know, it's just bad statistics. The entire statistical business confused the absence of proof with proof of absence. People did not understand the elementary asymmetry involved. You need one single observation to reject the normal distribution, but millions of observations will not confirm its validity. Why? Because the bell curve disallows large deviations, but the world we live in do not disallow long periods of quiet where nothing happens. If you look at the Japanese stock market from like 70 through 90, it was an amazingly tame market that just did nothing but go up. And if you looked at it, you would say, wow, there's no way this market could tumble 30%, 40%, and yet it's down 85, 90%. So yeah, it's possible. The correlation measures will likely exhibit severe instability. We've already seen that, right? Correlations are extremely unstable. Depends on the period. We saw that as well, right? That's the argument you saw on correlation. It's really period dependent. Yeah, people talk about correlation as if it was something real. He must have been reading Bridgewater as well, or Bridgewater has been reading him. Once you get a bell curve in your head, it's hard to get it out. So he doesn't like what you're taught. I mean, you were taught this in statistics, but who taught your statistics class? I bet it wasn't a finance professor. Who taught your stats class? I bet it was a math department TA, right? How many finance program problems did you do in your statistics class? Did y'all do stock scenarios in your statistics class? I remember taking that class and thinking, boy, this is a class I'll never need again. And then discovering it's a pretty important class, but it was taught by the math department. I was an accounting major and a music major. I didn't need this. So, in fact, accountants use it a lot, right? Accountants use the normal distribution all the time to do audits. It's just normal. It probably works pretty well in an audit. All right, we can do one more here. Our finance gets paid for luck. That's so true. In fact, one thing you should do early in your career is just roll the dice. Roll the dice, hope for a big win early in your career. You didn't get promoted. After that, they don't care how bad you are, you just keep getting promoted, because once you get that one big win, I mean, it's just really amazing. We perform well, often entirely due to luck, but force our clients to pay up for that luck. That's a big part of finance, is we pay people. People pay us because we had a few good years where all we did was roll the dice on what was doing well. So in 98, 99, we bet on .com companies, and guess what happened? We made a lot of money. And our customers are paying us. In fact, people were firing their managers and going to these tech managers because, whoa, they're the best thing in the world. Like the lady in my church, right? How can I get my broker to buy more tech stocks? She's asking me this in 2000. It's like, I wouldn't buy tech stocks. She thought I was an idiot. How can you be so stupid? It's like, thank you, lady in church, sweet little lady in church. But she looked at me like I was an idiot. I probably am an idiot, but I sure hope she didn't buy tech stocks in 2000 because she would have lost a lot of money. I love his Russian roulette example. He says in finance, it's almost like we're playing Russian roulette, except there's 100 barrels in the gun. And instead of pointing the gun at ourselves, we're pointing at our client. And every time we pull the trigger and nothing happens, they pay us money. And we just keep doing that. What happens in Russian roulette every time you pull the trigger? What happens to your statistics? Are you in better shape or worse shape? You're in worse shape, right? Every pull of the trigger, your probability of dying is going up. But that's what we say we're doing fine. We don't point it at ourselves upon our clients. And then when the bullet happens, what do we say? Well, sorry, everybody blew up this year. We get them to keep paying us, right? Even when we blow up their portfolio. Each time we pull the trigger, the probability goes up. We have moved from an owner, and this is something Jack Bogle says. We've moved from an ownership society to an agency society. We have stopped managing money and become marketers. This is almost a direct quote from Jack Bogle. This isn't a quote. I may be stealing this from Jack Bogle. I thought I was quoting Taleb, but I'm not. So Taleb does not have Professor Sweet in his book, I can assure you. So I actually agree with that. It's one of the reasons I retired. I moved from the pension, the ALM, the PNC company, the life insurance, to the mutual fund world. The mutual fund world, they pay you for luck. You're actually better off just taking risk, and it just did not make any sense. So I prefer the ALM management world, where there actually are things you can do to make the world safer. And A successful person will try to convince you that his achievements could not possibly have been accidental. A gambler wins at the roulette wheel and you go, hey, what's your secret? And they'll actually tell you, and they actually believe they have a secret. So you either have to believe some transcendental intervention is in play, accept his skills and insight in picking winners. The reference point to argument is follow, do not compute compute odds from the vantage point of the winner, but do it from those who started. There's a great Twilight Zone. I don't know if you ever watched the Twilight Zone, but it's one where it's an actual real life story, but this guy gets this letter. It's predicting something. And he reads it and the prediction comes true. Like, wow, that's amazing. He gets another letter. The prediction comes true. He says, wow. So then he starts sending the guy money. The next prediction comes true. He gets rich. He does it again. He's telling his peers. He makes a fortune. It's incredible. He leaves and they discover this whole thing was a scam. This guy was sending out letters to random people where he's predicting everything. Yes, no, 1, 3, you know. And he did so many of them that at least one of them was being right. And so he took the ones that were right, and then he did a second one. This guy just happened to be lucky that he got all the right ones and he made a fortune. But he's like, someone can this, and he's like amazed this guy can predict the future from his vantage point, but he was just the lucky one. So it gets back to, you know, the fact that someone won the lottery, does that mean you should buy lottery tickets? Is that enough evidence? Okay, so this is actually my favorite thing to do is getting through these great thinkers. So we're doing Taleb. He talks about the problem with normal distribution, especially in finance. Finance pays for risk. I mean, pays for luck. Lucky people get paid high salaries. And he says at any point, the richest traders are often the worst traders, mainly because they're the ones that fit the latest cycle the best, but the next cycle is going to be real different. So we're seeing that in the US. Growth stocks have just dominated the last several years, and now all of a sudden value stocks are coming back. We saw that in the 98, 99 timeframe. The bandwagon of jumping on the markets, assuming it's never going to change. And that's the argument you always hear. When Japan was making this huge rise, I came out of school during that time and it was like, US is done for. Everything's about Japan. They do everything right. They're smarter than we are. They're more organized. And we say, yeah, but the PE ratio is 100. So don't look at PE ratio, doesn't apply to Japan. It's different now. That's what they always say. It's different this time. And then it all came crashing down. The US came back really strong. It's just, we don't know. We like to think these things are true because that's where our money is. We tend to convince ourselves. And it's a really good way to convince yourself by calling those people who disagree with you really stupid, because that just makes you feel even better, right? So, boy, the more confident you are, the more likely you're about to crash. He gives some stories in his book about some of his friends, you know, moving up in New York City, buying these wonderful condos because they just had a great year. And then the next year they're out of a job, they're selling their condo, and he says it's just so predictable. He says this is unique to finance. This doesn't happen. I mean, if someone sat down at the piano and played perfectly like a Beethoven's B minor sonata, what would your mind think? You know, I wonder if that was luck or skill. I mean, it's possible he just sat down and just happened to hit the right keys, you know. But you can say that about finance, right? You can say that about poker. You can't say that about chess. You can't say that about piano play. We're going to talk about that when we talk about Annie Duke, the difference between poker players and chess players. Dentists, you hope it's not luck. You hope there's some skill there. And we're pretty confident about the skill. But with finance, there's people who think, wow, you guys are geniuses, when it could be entirely luck. It's just the nature of it. I gave you all this example of just random in itself. It could just really look like skill. But when you have millions of people doing stuff, the fact that 5 people over here just had this run that just seems so incredible, it's really not all that incredible. I didn't tell you all this story. I've told it in some other classes, but my boss said, Ron, we don't need the best managers. Just find me some good, solid managers that are consistently in the top 25. And so I went out and looked at thousands of managers, and I found 11 that were consistently in the top 25. And I said, I'll bring these names to my boss. He says, okay, well, let's go interview them. I said, well, just one little problem. If I'd done this randomly, I would have expected to have found 13 managers, but I actually found 11. So if it was random chance, I should have found 13 and I found 11. So what does that tell you? The chances those 11 are really skilled, there's no evidence for it. So, and he said, okay, well, let's go hire them. I was like, no, I'm telling you, we shouldn't hire them. And when we're lucky, we go out and write books about how skilled we are. So he says he does not like CEOs. There's no such thing as a foolish decision if it results in profits. The link between the skill of the CEO and the results are tenuous. I don't know if, I can't remember if he says it here, but you know, you've seen the books of the habits of the best performing CEOs. The problem with that is those are the exact same habits of the failing CEOs. They're both doing the same things. But why did they write the book about the successful ones? You remember what he said? Don't go study the successful CEOs. Go see what the unsuccessful ones, and you're going to discover they're doing the exact same things as the successful ones. You're focused on the wrong crowd. And then, kind of extending the same argument, is we're fooled by randomness. A lot of that, I think, is the way we're compensated. Our bosses are constantly, what are you seeing? What are you doing? My boss is constantly in my office. What are you going to do? What trade are you doing now? Is this kind of thing of you should be doing stuff. And so you got to, well, let me go find something that helps me have some excuse to do something. We see patterns of randomness. We create a model. We sell it to the public. The more information you give someone, the more hypotheses they'll formulate. They see random noise and mistake for information. The problem is that our ideas are sticky. So again, this is where I'm talking about investing your ego in it. Once we produce a theory, we're not likely to change our minds. So the longer you can wait to actually put an idea down, the better off you are. And then he talks about the confirmation bias, but this is, it's so true of our industry. As I always tell people, and Warren Buffett says, investing is like batting where they don't call strikes. And I said, yeah, that's true, except for investing, they don't pay you for getting on base, they pay you for swinging. And when they pay you to swing, you're going to swing. If you sit there and wait, I mean, can you imagine Major League Baseball if they never called strikes? The games would be very different, wouldn't they? You just wait till the pitcher gets worn out, and then you knock it out of the park. And that's what Warren Buffett's saying. You can just wait. There's times markets really do get grossly mispriced. And that's kind of what Taleb's saying. Wait for the black swans, bet on the black swans. I like what Bill Gross said. Bill Gross's book, I have his book and with his signature in it. So I thought that's pretty cool. I didn't like his book at all. I thought it was kind of a boring book, but he did say one thing I really liked. And he said, you can't beat markets unless your time horizon is long enough. If your time horizon is 5 years, you can beat markets. If your time horizon is 3 months, you're kidding yourself that you have any intelligence. But none of your bosses will have a 5-year time horizon, so that's not going to work. And go look at GMO. GMO is pretty amazing. They have their 7 asset classes, and they tell you which ones are going to outperform the others, and they're amazingly consistent. They're right a high percentage of the time. So if you bet with what they're doing, you'll probably, data is showing, you'll probably be much better off over the next 7 years. But during that 7 years, you're going to give up and get out and you're going to blow it. But if you just set it and do what they said, they don't get the returns correct, but their ranking of what did best and what did worse is amazingly accurate. And it's out there on our website. You can go look at it and see. And if you just did that, you would probably do pretty well. It's based entirely on valuations and what valuations should be and what's mispriced. But you got to be really patient because the things they're saying are overpriced, don't make sense. They're probably going to get more overpriced because they're on this momentum. And if you can wait that out 2 or 3 years, you'll come out ahead, but your boss probably can't do that. We think it is smarter to say because. I love this. Can you take the word because out of your vocabulary when your boss walks into your office? Biggest problem with the educational system lies precisely in it forces students to squeeze explanations out of subject matter and shames them for withholding judgment. There's a book I just read. It was talking about Harvard MBAs. Their case studies. and this book was talking about how ridiculous it is. You have these people who've never worked in their lives. They're at Harvard, so they know they're smarter than all the rest of us. And they have these major companies, and they're coming to these Harvard guys and saying, hey, what's the solution? You read the case last night. I need the solution for this company. And this professor's like calling on people, what, you don't have a solution? And one guy said, how would I have a solution? I'm in college. And the professor just beat him up. It's like, no, that's why you're here. You have absolutely. Is it possible for a Harvard grad to have a solution for a major corporation on a case that he or she just read last night for 45 minutes? It's ridiculous that we're expecting this type of greatness out of people who've not even done anything yet with their lives. So the ability to say, I don't know, but your boss won't like that, but we just don't know. We're watching it. So are we going to have a recession? Your boss comes in and says, are we going to be going into a session? What's the right answer to that question? I don't know. Isn't that the right answer? What does your boss want you to say? One of the guys who worked for me, he ran the gold fund at USA. Mark, this guy is great. My boss was always asking, he ran the gold fund. So he had asked Mark, how much should gold be worth? And Mark's answer was always, I don't know. It's like, well, you run the gold fund, so I have no clue how much gold should be worth. And he was always like that. All of his presentations, people would ask him these really specific questions. And it's like, how would I know that? It's like, but you run the fund. But he was always, if he didn't know the answer, he said, I don't know. And my boss would get so mad at him. It's like, well, do you want him to lie? Listening to the news on the radio every hour is far worse than reading a weekly magazine. I'm not a big fan of the Wall Street Journal. I don't read it. I read The Economist. It's weekly. He gives you a good way to tell this. This is one of the few quotes that comes out of the bed of Procrustes. But he said, there's a good way to test just how horrible Wall Street Journal is. Read it a month late. And you discover that they're talking about stuff that was really incredibly unimportant and didn't mean anything. But they had to fill up the paper, right? They got to put articles in there. They got to write something. I did a lot of articles when I was at USA, and the journalists would call me, and most of them, one thing that really irritated me, they already had their article written, and they already had my quote. They just didn't know who was going to say it. So they call me and say, Ron, would you think this? And I go, yeah, I could see that. And so now I'm being quoted. They write my name in. If I say no, they say, thank you much. There's one guy from Bloomberg. He called me up. He was pretty funny, a guy named Jeff. He's like, hey, what are you seeing? What are you doing? He's pretty laid back. I kind of like, he was just like, hey, what's going on? What are y'all thinking? I kind of like that approach. He was a lot more laid back. He's probably not working here anymore. He was a little too laid back, but it was cool. He was just like, what are y'all thinking? What ideas do you have? Anything strange going on that we should hear about? Versus the ones that we call and already had their story written. They just needed some confirmation. And so you read these articles and you go, wow, they got this person from here agreeing with them. Well, no, they've written their article because they have to write it so fast. And they're just calling, randomly calling until they can find someone that sounds like they have a title that means something and they're going to quote them. So it's just, what you're reading is not quite as well researched as you might think. So yeah, I don't know if y'all read The Economist. I do love The Economist, but it's weekly. That may be too frequent. Maybe you need to do monthly. I like the Financial Times more than Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if there's some difference in the way they do it, but look at what you're reading and ask if you're really getting information. All right, then his argument on the elites. Boy, he doesn't like elites, although he may be considered an elite himself. One of the biggest problems we have with elites is we never do anything statistical with them. So all these people talking on TV, no one goes back and says, well, how accurate were they last year? They just said oil prices are going to hit $200. Last year, they said oil prices are going to hit $10. How good were they last time? Do they have any statistical evidence that their forecasts are any good? So we rarely go back and ask those questions. He gets a little excessive here, but no one knew anything but elite thinkers thought they knew more than the rest because they were elite thinkers. And if you're a member of the elite, you automatically know more than the non-elite. The expert is the closest thing to a fraud. Can you tell he doesn't really like experts? Performing no better than a computer using a single metric, their intuition getting in the way. Professors that deal with the future and professions that deal with the future and base their studies on these non-repeatable paths have an expert problem. I'm not saying that no one who deals with the future provides any value, but rather that those who provide no tangible added value are generally dealing with the future. The problem with experts is they do not know what they do not know. They are quite ashamed to say anything outlandish. If you look at economist forecasts, it's pretty amazing how similar they all are. They're all clumped together, far more, why are our forecasts far more clumped than the actual future? Our forecast should be as wide as the actual distribution. We're not. Economists, inflation's been X percent, N percent. Okay, I think it's going to be that. And it's just really hard to get yourself to say, wow, it's going to really move. And the real answer is inflation is going to be between a pretty wide number, but people don't want to be the outlandish one. Economic forecasts tend to fall closer to one another than the resulting outcome. No one wants to be off the wall. In a study comparing investment analysts, who would be better, investment forecasters or weather forecasters? Analysts are worse at predicting, worse than weather forecasters, but we're more confident in our skills. Although I think I could forecast San Antonio weather in August in 2028 pretty accurately. 100 degrees, sunny, hot, no rain. I think I'd be better than I can forecast the stock market in 2028 in August. So I don't know if weather forecasters are that difficult. His study exposed an expert problem. There was no difference in results with a PhD and an undergraduate degree. Tell this to some of your PhD professors. They discovered that the negative effect of reputation, those who had a big reputation were worse predictors than those who had none. They showed no convincing evidence that economists as a community have an ability to predict. And if they do have some ability, the predictions are at best just slightly better than random ones, not good enough to help with serious decisions. They reached a sad conclusion that statistically sophisticated or complex methods do not necessarily provide more accurate forecasts than simple ones. Now you're going to have to contrast this to Doug Hubbard in what he says. He's not contrasting methods, sophisticated methods. He's contrasting intuition to statistics, real basic statistics. He says basic statistics are better than our intuition, and you'll see what he has to say on that. The world is just far too complicated. I have a quote in one of my presentations I don't show in this class anymore, but it came from Peter Bernstein in his History of Risk. And I think it's an hilarious story, but there were some forecasters for the government. I think it was weather forecast, but they were forecasting for the government. And they decided to test against just random, they did a random forecast and they did their forecast and they discovered their forecasts were no better than the random ones. So they sent a message to the general and say, hey, we discovered our forecasts are of no value. They don't predict anything. And the general says, I know that, but I still need them for decision-making purposes. And I don't know what they did with that information, but does that make any sense? We're giving you stuff that's of no value, but I need it. I got to make decisions. Okay, that's kind of strange. This is what I was talking about last class. A small number of black swans explains almost everything in our world. Ordinary events, the ones we study and discuss and try to predict, have become increasingly inconsequential. The normal is often irrelevant. Why do we keep focusing on the minutia, not the possible significant large events in spite of the obvious evidence? Life is the cumulative effect of a handful of significant shocks. History doesn't crawl, it jumps. So he's saying we should focus on this stuff. The problem is what chance we have of predicting them any more than anything else. I don't know anybody in December 2019 that was talking about 80% drops in revenues at Carnival Cruise Line or anything else like that, or oil prices hitting, one whatever this year. It's just, they stopped having me do TV interviews at USA because they asked me a question like, where do you think oil's going? I go, oh, how would I know that? I mean, it could be 80 bucks, it could be 200 bucks. And they go, Ron Sweet at USA thinks oil's gonna hit 200 bucks. Like, no, I didn't say that. So they finally said, Ron, we don't need you to interview anymore. And I was like, yeah, I got a face for radio and a voice for texting. So in this essay, I stick up my neck, and this is coming from Black Swan, I stick up my neck and make the claim against many of our habits of thought that our world is dominated by the extreme, the unknown, the very improbable. And all the while we spend our time engaged in small talk, focusing on the known. This implies the need to use the extreme event as a starting point and not treat it as an exception to be pushed under the rug. The future will be increasingly less predictable. This is one of the things he's predicting, right? He says you can't predict. He's predicting, and y'all can see, I mean, it sounds a lot like the last 30 years, but he's predicting an incredible period of stability, 8-9 years of stability, and then a crisis that's massive, followed by a lot of stability, and then another crisis that's more massive than the previous one, then stability, and then more massive than the previous one. That kind of feels like what we're going through, doesn't it? 2000, and then 2008 was bigger, and then 2020 was bigger. Now, why is he saying that? A lot of it has to do with globalization. He does blame finance on this as well. He says we're so interconnected, and we're making these bets that when they blow up, they're going to blow up big, and we keep doing it in a bigger group each time. So he does blame us somewhat. He says it's just the nature of what we're doing, but with what we're doing in globalization, we're just so much more interconnected. So the mistakes are now much more correlated. Yeah, this is a good way to think about risk. How often you arrive 3 or 6 hours late on a flight? How many times you've arrived 3 or 6 hours early on a flight? Is that a normal distribution? It's like, well, we'll be arriving 6 hours early today for your flight. I don't think you could even do that with an overseas flight. I've been 24 hours late on a flight before. I've had to sleep in I remember one night our trip to Costa Rica. We come back, they cancel our flight at like 2 a.m. and they're going to give us hotel vouchers and then come back for our 7 a flight. I'm like, why are you giving us vouchers for a hotel? By the time we get there, we'll be getting up to come back. Like, this is crazy. But I started thinking then maybe we should just drive to the Houston airport. And I was thinking exactly this. Driving has far smaller distribution than flying. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, you could have a wreck, but it's pretty unlikely. So your driving is probably gonna have a 1 hour standard deviation. Flights can have these massive, it's unlikely driving you're gonna come back 24 hours late unless something, flat tire or the entire engine went out. So I'm thinking, well, it's gonna be longer to fly, but the standard deviation is much shorter. I thought about it, but I only did it once because it's just, I don't like driving to Houston. Now, if we had autonomous vehicles, that changes everything, doesn't it? Then I can get in the car at 12 at night, lay down in a nice little bed, have my Wi-Fi, go to sleep, arrive in Houston or Dallas, who cares? My car can drive me around the city all it wants to. There, the standard deviation makes a big difference because I don't care, I'm sleeping during the whole thing. So you should start thinking these kind of things is, don't say, the flight's 30 minutes faster than driving, but the standard deviation's 3 hours greater. That may change your decision on how to do something. This explains why deficits tend to be larger, rarely smaller than planned. Risk management professionals look at the past for information. They talk about the worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario? Well, before the last worst case scenario, was that scenario in their analysis? It wasn't, because it wasn't their worst case scenario, it's the previous one. So your worst case scenario is just what happened, the worst case so far. Your next worst case scenario is going to be bigger just because it has to be. This method is called stress testing. Y'all heard that. They take the worst historical recession, the worst war, the worst historical move, or the worst point in unemployment as an exact estimate of the worst future, but they never notice the following. The so-called worst event, when it happened, exceeded the worst case at the time. That comes from Anti-Fragile. He's almost setting up that you just give up, become cynical. That's where Doug Hubbard's going to try to help you on this. But I think really what he's after is we're forecasting in a way that's really not helpful because we're focused on the wrong things and we're really bad at forecasting. He wants to change your thinking. I think Hubbard's going to help you more at that. Now, if we're fooled by randomness, we're also fooled by calmness. And where he says that is we prefer risk with low volatility but huge downside. And that's why, that's another way he says stable, 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 and then this massive, massive event. Because the things we bet on don't blow up very often. And when they don't blow up, they're really, really stable. But when they do blow up, it's just massive, massive. People are often ashamed of losses, so they engage in strategies that produce very little volatility, but have that large downside. He calls it collecting nickels in front of a steamroller. The Japanese culture, which is, I think there's been articles that Japan is actually changing their thought about business failure. That's really actually, I think, makes Japan an interesting place to invest now, which is ill-adapted randomness and badly equipped. That bad performance can come from bad luck. People hated volatility, just engaged in strategies exposed to blowups, leading to occasional suicides after a big loss. I learned about this problem from the finance industry, in which we see conservative bankers sitting on a pile of dynamite, but fooling themselves because the operations seem dull and lacking in volatility. Yeah, the most risky people, they walk around with the most confidence that they got everything under control. So he contrasts this, and I really like this. He contrasts, this is an anti-fragile. He contrasts it to the airlines industry. And I do encourage you to watch those films about airline crashes. The analysis they do afterwards, it's pretty impressive how precise they want to get, because they want to make sure this particular plane crash, is this a problem with all of these planes? And sometimes they find 3 or 4 different things going on. Sometimes it's training. If it's training, then they change the training manual. If it's something related to the fuel or something related to temperatures, those kind of things. And one thing they really get interested in, if they have the same thing happen 3 times, they don't care if it was all 3 of those flights could have landed safely, no one injured, but the next time maybe not. They're going to go study that in great detail. I love that about flying. Every plane crash brings us closer to safety, improves the systems, and makes the next flight safer. He's going to say finance is the exact opposite. Everything that goes wrong in finance doesn't make us safer, but with airlines, it makes us safer. So those who perish contribute to the overall safety of others. These systems learn because they are anti-fragile. We're going to define this here in a little bit, and set up to exploit small error. The same cannot be said of economic crashes, since the economic system is not anti-fragile the way it is presently built. There are hundreds of thousands of plane flights every year, but they're uncorrelated, right? That's the key. And what's the chance every flight goes down at the same time? Well, with autopilots, maybe you're talking about a hacking of the system, right? That maybe be possible, but probably pretty remote, you would think. What's the problem? What's the chance the entire global economy crashes together? That's pretty likely, right? Because we're all relying on each other. These systems learn because they are anti-fragile and set up. So there are hundreds of thousands of plane flights every year, and a crash in a plane does not involve others. So errors remain confined and highly, I don't know what that word means, so I won't even say it. Whereas global economic systems operate as one. Errors spread and compound, and we're going to definitely see this idea of contagion from Doug Hubbard. We are talking of partial, not general mistakes, small and not severe and terminal ones. This creates a separation between good and bad systems. Good systems are set up to have small errors independent from each other, negatively correlated to each other, since mistakes lower the odds of future mistakes. This is one way to see how one environment can be anti-fragile. That's the airlines industry, and the other fragile, modern economic life. If every plane crash makes the next one less likely, every bank crash makes the next one more likely. We need to eliminate the second type of error, the one that produces contagion in our construction of an ideal socioeconomic system. It's not that we don't learn from our mistakes, it's that we can't. The system's not set up for us to learn from our mistakes because it's so interconnected. Kind of a scary thought, right? So it means your world's going to be far riskier than my world. And yet I lived through October 87, the dot-com crash, Enron, the Russian debt crisis. You know, I lived through some pretty horrendous. Y'all remember the article from Doug Holton? I forgot his first name. From Holton, Glenn Holton. He lists all these risks and say, why do these enormous risks happen? And they're laughable because of how small they are. You know, he's talking about these massive $3 billion events. It's like big deal. That's just nothing today. Even if you adjust for inflation, they're nothing. So Taleb says, and this is where he's most controversial, and this is where he got beat up by Kahneman. If any of y'all watched that video yet, we should bet on fat tails, unexpected high volatility, so that we benefit from them rather than destroyed by them. This is what he means by anti-fragile. I'm going to define anti-fragile here pretty soon. So he says, put most of your money in really safe stuff, and then take a small part of your portfolio and just bet on black swans. And what Kahneman says is most people can't do that. Most people aren't multimillionaires with the best-selling series of books that, you know, it's like, oh, you know, I'll just make 3 million this year instead of 10 million. Most people, they can't do that. They got to plan for the retirement. So he gets pretty defensive on that, but this is a very tough thing for most people to do. I think it's interesting in 2020, Taleb got a lot of articles about how well his fund did, his Black Swan fund. What I didn't see is, you remember how the market crashed and then what did it do? Shot back up. All the articles are written right here on Taleb. How did he do on the way back? Did he get out and, you know, got all of his gains at the bottom, or did he ride it back up and lose it all? My guess is he probably lost a lot of that on the way back up. So you can have a speculative portfolio if you insure it. That's kind of my idea is, hey, do 100% stocks, but buy options on it. That's probably going to do better than 40% stocks, 60% bonds. And he also says there's positive black swans. The dovetail strategy of taking maximum exposure to positive black swans while remaining paranoid about negative ones. Do not try to predict a black swan. This is part of what his anti-fragile is all about. Don't predict risk, be anti-fragile. Investment preparedness, not in prediction. All of these recommendations have one point in common: asymmetry. The idea is that in order to make a decision, you need to focus on the consequences rather than the probability, which you don't know. Much of life is based on it. Pretty bold statement, and I somewhat agree with Kahneman. This is not something you could execute for the entire world and everybody do this. It's just would be really, really tough. I worry less about small failures and more about large, potentially terminal ones. I worry less about embarrassment than about missing opportunity. I'm very aggressive when I can gain from a black swan, when a failure would be of a small moment, and very conservative when I'm under threat of a negative black swan. I am very aggressive when an error in a model can benefit me, and paranoid when it can hurt me. The best description of my lifelong business in the market is skewed bets. I try to benefit from rare events that do not tend to repeat themselves frequently, but accordingly present a large profit. I try to make money infrequently as possible, simply because I believe that rare events are not fairly valued, and that rarer the event, the more undervalued it would be priced. Again, how many people can actually do this? Not many, very, very few. If you're worth 40 billion, and yeah, this probably makes a lot of sense. Probably not a bad strategy. So if any of y'all are worth $40 billion, you know, Taleb might be a good way to help think about it. So here he's talking about a meeting and he's giving his ideas, and they're like, what are you talking about? Doesn't make any sense. He says, my opinion was the market was more likely to go up, so he's bullish, and that it was preferable to short it. So I think it's more likely to go up and I'm shorting it. And if people were like, what are you talking about? Why? Because the upside was 10% and the downside was 50%. So yeah, it's more likely to go up 10% than it is to go down 50%, but it's not going to go up 50%, and it really could go down 50%. So I'm going to short it because if it goes down 50, I'll make a lot of money. If it goes up 10, I'll lose a little bit of money, but I won't be wiped out. Let us assume that the reader shared my opinion that the market over next week had a 70% chance going up and a 30% chance of going down. If it goes up by 1%. If it goes down 10. So people are like, we don't understand your strategy. Why are you shorting the market if you think it's going to go up? And why? Because you think it's skewed. The bet is skewed. All right, so let's talk about anti-fragility. So he wrote a whole book on this. I do not recommend this book. It's not on my reading list. I think I can give you the entire book right here. He spends like half the book talking about weightlifting, which is fine, but you know, but anyway, he kind of gets it related to anti-fragility, but I think he's kind of a little over the edge on that. So anti-fragility is not resilience. It's not robustness, and I hate robustness. There was like an 8-year period where everybody that came into my office was using the word robust. I was like, please stop saying robust. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. So the resilient just survives and survives okay. That's not anti-fragile. Anti-fragile are people who benefit. They excel in a crisis. Anti-fragile people are people who make money when things are volatile. They love volatility. All right. So the fragile are people who are wiped out by volatility. The resilient are the ones that hang in there with volatility. The anti-fragile are the ones who benefit tremendously with volatility. And I think this is the best part of the book right here. So I do love this. I've had students didn't care for this at all, so you might not like it at all, but I thought it was pretty good. He says, fragility can be measured, risk cannot be. I think that's really profound. We saw that with Glenn Holton, right? This guy who's in risk management. Remember the end of his defining risk? That it's worthless to say, can you measure risk? Because we can't. We can only do some kind of numbers around our perceived risk. The bigger question is it even worthwhile to try? He's not even going that far. Don't even try measuring risk. Measure fragility. That you can measure. Risk is not measurable outside of casinos and risk experts, and that's just in their minds. We can almost always detect anti-fragility and fragility using a simple test of asymmetry. Anything that has more upside than downside from random events of certain shocks is anti-fragile. The reverse is fragile. I like this part. So you've just now read the entire anti-fragile. That to me is the best part of the book, and I like it. I really do like it. I think it's actually one of his better points. How do you measure fragility? You just essentially, he's talking stress tests here, right? He's saying increase volatility dramatically and see who survives and who doesn't survive, and that you can actually do. You're not predicting volatility, you're just applying it. Let's throw a lot of volatility here and see what happens. And stochastic models can handle that quite well. You can run these things pretty easily. So are you fragile or anti-fragile? You know, that's the question you got to ask, and it's in all aspects of life, not just in investing. It includes employment and other things. All right, any questions on that? That's pretty important. He says Anti-Fragile was his most important book. I think Fooled by Randomness was his best book. Black Swan's his most popular book. He says Anti-Fragile. He says Fooled by Randomness and Black Swan were just preparatory kind of prefaces to Anti-Fragile. I don't buy that. So, but you read them, let me know. I mean, you can read Anti-Fragile if you like, and let me know if you disagree with that. That was just my perception. And I started with Black Swan just because that was the best seller. I wish I'd started with Fooled by Randomness. I think it's probably the better book to start with. Have any of y'all read any of them yet? Anyone got it on your Audible collection to start reading it? I'm giving you stuff that's going to be incredibly powerful in an interview. This is what they're looking for. This is kind of the catchphrases you can work in to interviews. I remember USAA at the end of my interview, why they ever hired me, I have no earthly idea. I had no clue what I was talking about. I had to be the stupidest person they interviewed. And I was really lucky. This one guy named Ed asked me a question. I had no idea what the question was. So I gave an answer that made no sense. And he goes, "What are you saying?" And Pat, sitting next to him, she goes, no, Ed, this is what he meant. And I'm like, yeah, see, that's what I was saying. I didn't know what USA did. I didn't know what his question meant. And they hired me. It's like, why did they hire me? And then I found out 3 weeks later why they hired me. The CFO had a daughter who was a music major, and he saw I was a music major. He says, "Oh yeah, I'm glad that we hired you. I want you to talk to my daughter and talk her out to become a music major." I said, "Oh, now I know why they hired me." So anyway, talk about black swans, right? And the guy that interviewed me at USAA, at UT Austin, was a musician. We sat there and talked music for an hour. So, a lot of black swans that really help you out in life. But all right, I was definitely not anti-fragile in college. I was like about to fall apart in any second. All right. And then he doesn't like forecasting. We've already seen that. Forecasting is necessary, I guess. I do actually, I mean, I literally believe USA should stop forecasting. They've got millions of dollars invested in forecasting. I think they should just stop. I really, my time there. Now, maybe they're doing it differently now since they've set up that new stochastic department. But when I was there, I didn't see any value to it at all. To me, it looked like a complete waste of time. But be careful. You have to do it. Sometimes you have to do it. Just firms just feel like that's part of what they're supposed to do. I find it scandalous that in spite of empirical record, we continue to project into the future as if we are good at it. We were good at it using tools and methods that exclude rare events. Why on earth do we predict so much? Why don't we talk about our record in predicting? So I think I've told y'all this story, but try this at your job. 10-year forecast. Okay, USA, you got a 10-year forecast. What's the probability of recession in the next 10 years? Oh, it's going to happen. Yeah, almost certainly. How many recessions in your forecast? None. So you know your forecast is wrong. I mean, so why are you forecasting? We're sure to have a recession next 10 years. We didn't put one in your forecast. Why do it? Why not put a random one in there somewhere? Let's assume a recession in year 4. Wouldn't that be a little more valuable than just assuming nothing bad happens? It doesn't make sense. They have a life insurance company that if interest rates fall to 1%, they're done for. Well, let's run that scenario and see. And I remember the actuaries coming to me and saying they wanted, when no one was worried about interest rates falling, they wanted to buy hedges against interest rates falling. They were begging me, let's get this approved. We couldn't get it approved. Why? Because no one was thinking about rates falling. And they were like, this is the best time to do it. The insurance is really cheap. And guess what happened soon after that? Interest rates fell, and they're like, see, we told you. And it's like, well, you didn't tell me rates were going to fall, but you were right. We should have bought the hedge. So there's a good chance for forecasting to do something, and we ignored it. What you should avoid is unnecessary dependence on large-scale harmful predictions, those and only those. Avoid the big subjects that may hurt you. Be fooled by the small ones. It gives kind of some stupid examples here just to make his point. Demand certainty for the next picnic, but avoid government social security forecast for the year 2040. Know how the rank believes, not according to their plausibility, but by the harm they may cause. I used to tease our actuary at USAA. He would send me a 70-year forecast of our pension plan. And I'd call him up, year 62, I'm kind of wondering how you got that number. It's like, he knew I was joking. He was smart enough to know, but it's like 70-year forecast. And when USA employees are going to die, and what inflation is going to be, and what interest rates are going to be, who's going to take the lump sums, who's going to take the pension. It's like, yeah, it's 70-year forecasts. Anyone producing a forecast and making an economic analysis needs to have something to lose. So he's the skin in the game. That gets back to that predicted markets. If you can somehow get people betting and you get a crowd together, the distribution of the crowd is actually better than the experts, especially if you've got skin in the game. Forecasts induce risk-taking. They are more toxic to us than any other form of human pollution. So he's kind of in my camp. The forecast is bad because it gets you to do something you would not have done without the forecast. And once you realize the forecast is no better than random chance, then it got you to make a decision that you shouldn't have made. You didn't really have any better information on. All right, so this is Taleb. He is see if I can find it. Here it is. You can't hear it, can you?
$1 over a year, a small amounts, you get more pressure.
Right, who's who, first of all?
Caleb is the one on the left.
The left here. All right, so there's Kahneman. He's still alive. He looks like he's getting up there, but he's still alive.
Make money, make it in small amounts. And if you're going to lose money or have a bad event, have it all at once. Because losing, you'd rather lose $1 million in one day than lose a little bit of money, of even the smaller amounts of the money you fair.
Kahneman doesn't look all that impressed, does he? if I ever agree to be interviewed by Kahneman, y'all got to talk me out of it because it would be brutal. He's a very bright man, very astute. He reminds me of some people who work at USAA. You can come into this really complicated stuff and they understand it better than you do. 5 minutes into your presentation, you're like just blown away. There was a general at USAA, no finance background. I bring in these presentations and boy, he picked on him immediately. He was always talking about, oh, Ron, you're so bright, you're so intelligent, all this. I'm like, this guy's like twice as smart as I am. There's people like that. Kinnaman's that kind of guy. He just hears something and immediately his brain can see the full picture. So it's a really, really great interview. He's still there kind of, yeah, whatever. But great interview. I do highly recommend it. It's only an hour 18. So it's just like a class, right? You'll probably get more out of that than you will out of some of your classes. Not this class, of course, but all right. Any comments on Taleb? On a scale of 1 to 10, I think Taleb is generally wrong, 1, generally got it exactly right, 10, kind of on the right track, 5. What do y'all? I don't have my voting up here. 4, so kind of below average. He's making waves in the industry. He gets quoted a lot. He's obviously making a lot of money. I think someone's tried to get him to come here and he's just way too expensive. So he's definitely, you know, he's got that celebrity thing going. All right, well, let's talk Kahneman or Kahneman. I don't know how you say it. So it's Kahneman and Tversky. Tversky passed away before he got his Nobel Prize. He would have gotten the Nobel Prize. But these are these two, not economists, not finance people, these two psychiatrists or sociologists or whatever they were, I guess sociology. And they took all these theories of economics and they say, hey, these are testable. They're saying this is human behavior. This is how we react. Let's test it, right? Piece of cake. Let's just go out and see if this is actually true or not. And they discovered that humans don't behave the way economists say they behave, and sometimes in really pretty embarrassing ways. So another book, you definitely need to read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, or, and I hope these all still work, his Nobel Prize speech. Let's see if it still works. I tried them at the beginning of the semester, but these links tend to disappear. Let's see if this one's still up there. There it is. Yep, there it is. There's his intro. Here's the actual lecture. I forget how long it is. 37 minutes. What's really amazing to me about it is there's absolutely no one in the hall. I don't know if I can find the hall, but there's one guy in there with an infant.
Say 2 central properties of perception and how they affect intuitive judgments and choice.
So he's talking about biases. He's talking about decisions, all the stuff that we do, right? Decision making. That's why I love Annie Duke's book so much. It's all about decision making. He talks about decision making, but in a real abstract way. So it's kind of hard what he's talking about to actually go away and say, oh, I need to start doing this. That's where Annie Duke takes it and says, here's what you should be doing. She gives you, here's the 7 things you should be doing. Here's the 7 mistakes you're making. And here's the 7. So she's a little bit more practical. And she quotes him quite a bit. You can definitely see Kahneman a lot in his presentation. So this is a great presentation. You have to be careful. There's a couple of his slides that have errors on them. It's a little infuriating because you're trying to follow his logic. And he even at one point says, oh, wait, there's a typo there. So don't try to overanalyze the chart and say, I'm not getting this, I'm getting this. It could just be he put the arrow in the wrong direction. All right, but very good lecture. He gives actual examples and they're quite fascinating. When you first read them and say, well, that's kind of strange. I mean, just to give you an example of the kind of things he did. He had people price a box of dishes. And one box of dishes had maybe 70 pieces in it, but maybe 2 of the dishes were broken. And one box had like 40 pieces in it and none of them are broken. And so they had the people price the 2 boxes. What's the more valuable box? 70 pieces or 40 pieces? Which should be more expensive? 70 pieces, right? 2 parts are broken, but now you got 68 pieces. Which one do they value more valuable? 40 pieces. Why? Because he says we tend to be really good at averages, but we're not good at sums. In our brains, well, that's pretty important in finance, right? If we're using averages when we should be using sums, we're gonna make some really bad decisions. But our brain is much easier. If I gave you 50 numbers, you could probably get the average pretty quickly in your mind as I go along than you could, putting them all together. And so it's those type of examples, but he's not giving you a theory. They actually went out and had people do those 2 things. And he compared the different, and he said, we know for sure this is more valuable than that, and yet they put more value on that. Why is it? What is the human brain doing that's causing that error? So I find it really, really fascinating stuff. Here's his talk. Boy, I love the TED Talk. Oh my word, you've got to watch this. This is how if you want to be happy in life, you may not want to be, if you want to be miserable in life, don't watch this. But if you want to be happy in life, this is a great.
All right, I'm John Boyd.
Oh, actually, it's the TED Talk. That's the Google Talk. So this is his Google Talk. And then the next one is the TED Talk. I love this TED Talk. I've been living like this my whole life. I think that's the reason I'm so much happier than all my friends, because they make huge mistakes. I think to me, it was natural to do what he's talking about, but listening to his talk is like, oh, now I see why I'm doing it. So now I have a theory behind my madness. But great video. And he says, people think they make decisions and that their happiness comes from experiences. And he says, that's absolutely not true. We make decisions and our happiness depends on our memory of experiences. And oh, by the way, our memory or experiences are almost completely uncorrelated to our experiences. They're 2 radically different things. What do you remember? Very, very little. And what kinds of things do you remember? Probably the most important thing you remember are changes. And in fact, boy, I discovered this is one of the reasons I retired. I discovered this real quickly. I can break my life into chunks of changes. Right? You remember high school really well, don't you? Because you have freshman year, junior, sophomore year, junior, they're all very different, all these changes. You remember college, all these changes. Well, then I go to USA and I break USA in these buckets. Well, I had one job that was 9 months, had one job that was 7 months. Those take equal space in my brain. And I'm glad I changed jobs a bunch because I can remember a life much better. So I almost think, if you have kids, you should move every 6 months because that's how they remember stuff. I think that's, my guess is, I haven't done the studies, that the kids of military people are probably happier than the kids of non-military because they can remember their lives much better because it just breaks it up. But he talks about that. And what that means is happiness in life is how much you remember of your experiences and how you remember them. And change is extremely important. I had a student come back to me in tears several years ago. He bought his $70,000 car. He bought this really expensive house because his wife really wanted this nice house. And she's like, you're going to get your car, I'm going to get my house. Now he's loaded up on debt. And I said, you just messed up. You just made the Kahneman mistake here. If you want to be happy, you don't go out and buy the $70,000 car. You buy the $20,000 car. And then the next time you buy the $25,000 car, and then you buy the $40,000 car. Even if you can afford the $70,000 car, you don't buy it. You still do it in stages because that's what happiness is about. It's the memory those. And which is better, going from the $30,000 car to the $35,000 car, or buying the $90,000 car, losing your job and having going back to the $20,000 car. Or if you went to the $30,000 car, now you got to go back to the $20,000. Going from the 90 to the 20 is really painful. So you set your life up, and he talks about that. He also says we don't actually enjoy experiences. We don't go do things for the experience. Why do we do things? We do things for the memory of the experience. And so that actually means when you go on a vacation, you need to think about that. Have you seen people on vacations that the entire vacation is behind their phone? What are they doing? They're not the experience. What are they doing? They're setting up the memory of the experience. He actually asks the question in here. He says, I'm going to give you all paid vacation, any place you want to go, anywhere in the world. I'll pay for it all. If you want to go do tennis with John McEnroe, I'll pay for it. 10 days, airfare, hotel, 5-star hotel, all the food you want. The only downside is when you get back, we're going to erase all memories of the trip. Now tell me where you want to go. What would you say? Would you care? Why are you going on the trip? For the experience? No, you're going on a trip for the memory experience. So if you set up your life like that, you'll actually be far happier. I've got a lot of miserable people giving me advice on happiness. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'll listen. I have a lot of poor people giving me advice on finances. I got a lot of out of shape people giving me advice on exercise and diet. So he's someone you can actually listen to. It's a really good lecture. And I think quite insightful. It does relate to finance though, because you make financial decisions not based on your experiences, but based on your memories of experience. And what drives your memories of experience is 100% your ego, which means you have a really rotten memory of your experiences. You remember your experiences in order to make yourself look as smart as possible. I know that's true in my own experience. You remember things like, whoa, I did that just right. And then when you messed up, it's like, oh, that was bad luck, something else. That's the way we remember things, which means we're going to be really bad decision makers. And here's the Google talk. We're gonna leave this. I'm gonna actually jump to Annie Duke. I'm gonna leave this because I want you to watch some of these videos. But what he's famous for is the boundary rationality and the prospect theory. Prospect theory is probably his most famous thing. There's one lecture I wanted to show y'all, but it doesn't exist anymore. But he was speaking at a commencement address. So they get this Nobel Prize winner, and I think it's hilarious. They introduce him. It's pretty cool to have a Nobel Prize winner speaking at your commencement. He's speaking at a commencement. You come up and say, congratulations, students. Let me talk about your future. He doesn't do that. He walks up to the podium and says, and so what we're currently now discovering about prospect theory is, the parents are like, what is he talking about? He goes right into the prospect theory at a commencement address. Doesn't say anything to the students. I thought it was hilarious. I don't know, people who got home were like, who was that guy? Why did he win a prize? So here's the things that he talks through. I brought in some of the charts from this is from his Nobel Prize. So you can see here's the set example. Here's the memory one, which is actually pretty interesting. It's kind of scary that they would actually do this, but they had people to get medical procedures. And some of the people, the pain was less and it didn't last as long, but the worst pain was right at the end. The other group, the pain was worse, it lasts longer, but the pain was the least at the end. And then they asked them, who would want to do this procedure again? And who do you think wanted the procedure again? People who had less pain for less time, but ended at the worst, or the people who had more pain for more time, but ended at the best? And it was the latter group. Does that make any sense at all? But what does our minds remember? It's memory, right? It's memory experience. And that's what they remember was the last part of it wasn't that bad. And which would you rather go through? Patient A or patient B? Not as much pain, or maybe, more pain. Maybe the peak was about the same, but the peak happened right at the end. And these people said, I never want to go through that again. These people say, yeah, it wasn't so bad. That's the way the mind works. And we're talking decision-making, right? And all of this. And in prospect theory we view losses very differently than gains. And that makes us make really bad decisions. And it does explain a lot. Why is it in the divorce where one spouse is the one who was poor and one spouse is the one that's the multimillionaire? Why does the poor one say, let's settle, settle, settle? And the rich one says, no, I'm taking this to the very end. Because we're very aggressive in the case of losses. We're not nearly as aggressive in the case of gains. And that's just the way, and that makes us make decisions. Prospect theory is probably his most famous thing of all. And here's the experience. So we'll talk through those. But the happiness in life is not the intensity of the experience, it's the number. It's the number of experiences. If you can spread out happiness, I maybe overkilled it. USA, I kept getting promotions. And I remember when they made me VP and my boss was apologizing for my bonus. And I was looking at this number like, am I looking at that right? I couldn't believe they're going to pay me that much money. I thought, this is insanity. They're going to pay me 3 times more in one day than I've made in any year in my life. I just thought, this is crazy. I can't believe they're paying people this much money. And he's apologizing to me. But I never changed my standard of living. I stayed in the same neighborhood. My theory was, I won't tell you how much I made, but my theory is if you make $100,000 and you live in a neighborhood where people make 60,000, you're going to feel rich. You make $100,000, you move in a neighborhood where people make 150, you're going to feel poor. Taleb actually tells a story about a lawyer living in New York City making $1 million, and his wife's complaining about how poor they are because they're in a neighborhood where the average pay is 1.5 million. What if they lived in a neighborhood where the average pay was 500,000? They would feel really, really rich, right? There's simple things you can do to make your life so much easier. I lived in a neighborhood where people are like a $500 expense comes up and they're just freaking out. And I'm thinking, yes, no big deal, Now, if I moved to Dominion and I got this $1 million thing hits and, Tim Duncan's like, well, big deal, just pay it. I'm like, no, it's $1 million. You can really set up your life. So Kinemon has a lot to say, I think. So it's not the intensity, it's the number. Right, but I do want to talk about Annie Duke and we'll come back. So what we're actually going to do next Thursday is you're going to watch these videos instead of class. All right. And to get credit, you got to answer some questions and submit them. All right. So, because I do want you to watch them and they're much smarter than I am. So you'd rather watch them anyway. But I will be here Thursday. So if you want to sit down with your laptop and do project 2 next Thursday, I'll be here and we'll do that. All right. So you don't have to watch the videos during Thursday's class time. You can do it anytime. All right. Everybody understand that? I'll put it in an email. But I do definitely want to watch mainly Doug Hubbard. All right. I won't be quite as picky on Kinemon. I do want you to watch it. It's going to be more than a class's worth of time, but your other classes have textbooks to read, don't they? So, just view this as kind of a textbook. I think you'll benefit greatly from watching these. I think you're going to like Doug Hubbard better than Kinemon because I think there's times where Kinemon gets a little bit deep into the weeds and you're like, wait, what is he saying? Some of those, the red ball and black ball, and you pick 3 and 7, it gets a little confusing. Whereas I think Hubbard is much more, he's easier to understand and easier to repeat. So you can actually get into an interview and talk about that. But what we're going to do tonight and Tuesday is talk about Annie Duke, my new favorite writer. And this Thinking Fast and Slow is essentially him going through his book. And so there's going to be some overlap between that and the other 2. He's at Google. Google has those talks, which I think is pretty interesting. They've had Dammit Darren, they've had some other really famous people in there. So for Annie Duke, there's a PowerPoint. I don't usually use PowerPoints, but there is a PowerPoint I'm going to go through. There it is right there, Thinking in Bets. And the Doug Hubbard, I'll actually send you the questions, but the questions are in the order of his discussion. So you can just kind of type your answers as you go. I'm not going to grade it as far as the right answer. I'm going to grade it just to make sure you can prove you watched the whole video. And you should, because it's really good. It's a very, very good video. You will like it a lot. But so this is, I've done this presentation, not just in my classes, but I've done it at some conferences. And I get some of the strongest reactions to this presentation. The people going, wow, she has a really interesting way of thinking about things. So I want to start it tonight so you can see essentially what is her angle. And she specifically says we're talking about decision making, and that's a big part of risk management. If you never had to make a decision, you wouldn't have much risk to deal with, right? If you're sitting in an isolation jail cell somewhere, there's not a lot of decision to make. But if you have to make decisions, you have risk, because if you do A, B, or C, that's going to change the outcomes, and so that makes a difference. So how can we think about this? Here's 4 books that, in fact, I need to bring some more in. There's actually more books I could bring in. These first 2 I really love. Have any of y'all read either of these books before? Right, so peak and range, they're the exact opposites. They're polar opposites. Peak is talking about how you can become an expert. You can ace something really, really well written. Everybody I've had that's read that book, they always come back to me like they're quoting it constantly, like, wow, that was so interesting. I really got a lot out of it. Range actually criticizes peak and says it's incorrect. But they're talking about two very different things. Peak works really, really well if you're trying to become the next Tiger Woods or you want to become a chess master. Range works really well if you want to be a tennis pro or you want to be really good at poker. Right? They're what's different about them? Well, what's the difference between golf and tennis? Pretty obvious difference, right? Tiger Woods, how many people does he need to worry about? Tiger Woods, right? As long as he plays his game, that's all he's got to worry about. If you're a tennis star, you got to worry about your game, but you also have to worry about what the other player is going to do. Where are they going to lob it? Where are they going to serve it? Where are they going to hit it? So chess, what do you know about chess? If you can, do 40 moves ahead, like the computer, you're going to win. You can think that far. You will win. It's not like you got a good chance of winning. If you're playing a novice and you're an expert, you're going to win the game. There's no doubt about it. What about poker? You can't go 40 steps ahead. And in fact, with poker, you might do well until you get a novice, because the novice is like, wow, my word, what are they thinking? What are their, what signs are they giving me? That kind of thing. So these are the two worlds. Peak is talking about how to specialize. And he's talking about practice. And some of the things in this book I found absolutely amazing. The thing on the number memory, he had this guy come in and do number memory. How many numbers in a row can you memorize? And he got up like 17, 18. And they started trying other techniques. And he got up well over 100. I thought, how can you, that someone reads 100 numbers to you, you can say them back from memory? That seems impossible, doesn't it? But he somehow taught himself how to do that. And then the world record, it's several hundred. And it seems unbelievable, doesn't it? To see how can someone memorize that kind of numbers? But he talks about the techniques that they use and how that works really well. You're really, really specializing. You're becoming really, really good at one thing. Range says that's great if you want to memorize a bunch of numbers. But if you want to play tennis, that doesn't, I forget the tennis star he talks about. It's the guy from UK. Who is that? I know he is, famous tennis player, or whoever it is. But he says, so Tiger Woods, when did Tiger Woods start playing golf? Like at 2 months or something, right? Before he even walk, playing golf. This tennis star, whatever his name is, he didn't play, his mom was a tennis coach. And he didn't play, his mom wouldn't let him play tennis. He was playing soccer, he was playing other things. He didn't play tennis until high school. And he says that helped him a lot. It gave him this range. It was better to be a generalist in tennis than it was just to focus on that one thing. So the two books I think are both powerful because I think they both give you insights on how to become an expert, but also the importance of being general. So I would highly recommend both of these books. And in fact, I would recommend you read Peak first and then immediately read Range. I think it would be very, very valuable to your thought process. Deep Work, I don't know why I have it in here other than he's talking about how to become more productive by shutting down distractions, how to get better in a distracted world. He essentially says get off of social media entirely. But it's an interesting book. If you don't want to read his book, Cal Newport, he does a TED Talk, and his TED Talk probably covers everything. But all of his fellow workers were asking him, how are you so productive? You're publishing so many articles. And he says, well, I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. He's like, you're not on Twitter? How can you not be on Twitter? Every professor has to be on Twitter. It's like, yeah, you're wasting a lot of time on Twitter. But here's Thinking in Bets. But there's other ones out there. I'll have to show you the other ones. There's several books I've read here recently that are just really, really, really good. But she's talking about making smarter decisions when you don't have all the facts. So we're getting in this field of behavioral finance, behavioral economics. I know there's people out here that don't care for this. If you read Cliff Asness, he says, yeah, everything you're saying is really interesting, but you haven't given me anything to work with. I can't do anything with what you're talking about. You can't prove that what you're saying actually leads to better decisions. I disagree with him on that, but that's his view. It's growing in performance, gives us a better understanding of economics, a better understanding of markets, a better understanding about how humans actually make decisions under uncertainty. I mean, making decisions under certainty is pretty easy, right? I'll give you a choice. I'll give you $1 million. I'll give you $1 billion. You've got to make a decision. That's pretty easy. But with uncertainty, it's much different. And how we make decisions doesn't line up with the theoretical, rational decision-making assumptions that underline our models of economics or markets. A good book, maybe not a book, but a good article, you can do either way. But Dr. Lowe, Adaptive Markets. I don't talk about it in this class, but I could add this to this class. His argument is the models, the theories, the distributions work really well in normal times, but they don't work well in the extremes. And why don't they? And what can work well in the extremes? And his argument is markets adapt in this almost evolutionary way. And they adapt during the extremes. In the extremes, we learn stuff that change our behavior going forward. And that's what he says. If we're going to be making decisions about markets, we need to understand how markets make decisions in the extremes. And that's how we're going to make our decisions coming out of the extremes. Really good book. Or you can just read the article. He has his PDF out there somewhere. Or you can just watch his videos. Great professor as well. I've met him a couple of times. Really nice man. This is the guy I wanted to give a gift to one of my students because he'd taken on really big responsibilities. So I emailed him and said, "Would you autograph this book?" And he said, "Sure, send it along." So I sent it up to him. He autographed it, sent it back. It's a really nice man. So there are other people thinking through this. So we're going to see what Annie Duke has to say. Obviously, Thinking Fast and Slow. The Undoing Project is Michael Lewis's story about Tversky and Kahneman. And I found it very interesting. Y'all have read some Michael Lewis. This is the only Michael Lewis book I've read. I'm not actually interested in his other ones. My students keep saying, you got to read it. I just have never gotten into it. So this isn't a #1 Times book, but it's by a #1 Times author. So Kahneman and Undoing Project, those are 2 books. Oh, there's the Adaptive Markets. I forgot I put it in there. Those are 2 books to read right together as well. So y'all need to be reading. Here's James Montier. He takes behavioral finance and says, what does this mean specifically for investing? Here's Doug Hubbard's book and then Annie Duke's book again. I do recommend Doug Hubbard books. So here's Annie Duke. She was a professional poker player. She played for over 20 years. She had $4 million in winning, which doesn't sound all that impressive over 20 years, but still, I mean, playing poker. And she's going to take the lessons she learned as a poker player and apply it to decisions to make in life. She says poker forces many decisions in a compressed time. The statistics, the biases, the reasoning errors, and the strategies for improvements are very similar to the other decisions you're going to make. Essentially, what she's saying is your life is more like poker than like chess. Your life is more like tennis than like golf. You know, your life isn't like, I'm going to go work on my short game for the next, 20 hours, and that's going to improve her. No, it's more like I'm going to work on my serve, but then the guy I'm competing against or the lady I'm competing against, they're going to be working on how to return my serve, and that's going to change everything. And, that's more like life. It's like chess. We already talked about that. The master always wins. Poker, a novice can win. The loser in chess can know exactly what they did wrong. A loser in poker could have done everything exactly right and still have lost. Is that true about life as well? And exactly, right? So this is what she's talking about. So I want to get into it. What she's going to do is talk about the mistakes we make, and she has 7 of those. And then she's going to give you the strategies. And she has 7 of those, so all lines up. They don't necessarily match one to one. So we're going to walk through those strategies. To me, time travel is one of my favorite. I love time travel. So I'll talk about time travel. I use it all the time. In fact, I'm going to 2028 this afternoon. I mean, no, not really. But anyway, all right. So I'll see where we're going. Next Thursday, what are you doing? Come in here, work on a project, watch the videos. All right, I'll put it in my weekly